A mother running for 18 months. A crime empire that never stops hunting. A Christmas Eve that changes everything. Elena Russo thought she could outrun her dead husband's family forever until the black SUV pulled up outside her motel room at dawn. Inside, Dominic Romano, the ruthless head of New York's most powerful crime dynasty. His message is simple. Her 4-year-old son is the last blood heir, and the running stops now. One choice remains: return willingly to the world she fled, or lose Adrian through force she cannot fight. Will Elena surrender to save her son, or discover that the most dangerous man alive might be her only salvation? If this story grabs you, smash that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far Elena's journey reaches across the world. Now, let's begin. Had surrendered to decay years before. Had surrendered to decay years before Elena Russo ever found it. A woman who'd spent 18 months learning to sleep with one eye open finally allowed herself to dream. It was a mistake she couldn't afford. The dream was always the same. Adrian, laughing in sunlight, running through a park without fear. No fake names, no cash-only transactions, no checking the locks 3 times before allowing exhaustion to claim her. In the dream, they were free. Reality arrived at 5:47 a.m. in the form of headlights cutting through the threadbare curtains. Elena's eyes snapped open, her body moving before consciousness fully returned. Muscle memory guided her hand beneath the pillow, where she kept the prepaid phone and the envelope containing $2,000 in small bills. Everything she owned that mattered, condensed into objects she could grab in 30 seconds. The headlights didn't pass. She was at the window in 3 silent steps, peering through the gap where the curtain met the wall. The black SUV sat in the parking lot like a predator that had finally cornered its prey. Engine running, windows tinted dark enough to hide whoever sat inside watching her room, her heart hammered against her ribs. Not again, please, not again. Mama? Adrian's sleepy voice cut through the darkness. Is it time to go? 4 years old and he already knew the drill. The thought sent ice through Elena's veins. Not the fear for herself, but the rage at what this life had stolen from him. A childhood, stability, the simple luxury of waking up in the same bed twice. Not yet, baby, she whispered, though her hands were already moving, stuffing their few belongings into the duffel bag she never fully unpacked. Go back to sleep. But Adrian was sitting up now, his dark eyes, so much like his father's, it sometimes hurt to look at him, tracking her movements with the solemn understanding of a child who'd learned too young that the world was not safe. Elena's mind raced through options like shuffling cards. The bathroom window was too small. The front door was the only exit, and it faced the SUV. The phone in her hand felt heavy with possibility and futility. 911 would bring questions she couldn't answer, connections she couldn't risk. 18 months. 18 months of running, hiding, reinventing herself in forgettable towns with forgettable names. 18 months since she'd walked away from the funeral with Adrian's hand in hers and terror in her throat, knowing that the family would never let them go. Marco Russo had been dead 3 days when she'd learned the truth. Not about his death, a rival family's bullet, quick and final, but about the life he'd hidden from her. The legitimate import business had been a facade. The respectful family gatherings had been strategy sessions. The grandfather who'd seemed merely stern had been a man whose name made politicians sweat and enemies disappear. Marco had kept her ignorant deliberately, a calculated protection that became a cage. And when he died, that cage had shifted, its bars closing tighter around her and Adrian both. Elena had attended the funeral in the black dress Marco's mother had sent over, standing beside people whose smiles didn't reach their eyes. She'd held Adrian close while they lowered her husband into the ground, and she'd listened to the whispered conversations that ceased when she approached. The boy should stay with family. She doesn't understand our world. Marco's wishes don't matter now. She'd understood enough. By midnight that same night, she and Adrian had been on a bus heading west, her wedding ring sold for cash, her phone smashed and discarded. The knock on the motel room door shattered the memory. 3 measured raps. Patient. Inevitable. Elena's breath caught. Adrian made a small sound of fear, and she moved to him instinctively, placing herself between her son and whatever waited on the other side of that door. Mrs. Russo. The voice was male, deep, and carried the kind of authority that expected obedience. I know you're awake. I can see your shadow on the curtain. She said nothing. Her hand found Adrian's, squeezing reassurance she didn't feel. My name is Dominic Romano. I'm family. I'm here about Adrian. Romano. The name hit her like a fist. Not Russo, her dead husband's surname, but Romano. The name Marco's mother had used before marriage. The family name that carried weight in circles Elena had been sheltered from. The empire Marco had been born into and tried to protect her from. We need to talk, the voice continued. You can open the door, or I can open it for you. But either way, the running stops tonight. Elena's mind spun. Dominic Romano. She'd heard the name exactly once at the funeral, spoken in hushed tones by men in expensive suits. Marco's uncle, the head of the family after his father's death 2 years prior, a man whose reputation preceded him like winter before the storm. Go away, she called out, hating how her voice shook. We have nothing to discuss. A pause. Then, I'm not here to hurt you, Elena. May I call you Elena? No. I'm going to anyway. There was something almost amused in his tone, though the underlying steel never softened. Elena, it's 20 degrees below zero, and it's Christmas Eve. I've been traveling for 8 hours to find you. The least you can do is let me deliver my message in person rather than through a door. How did you find us? Does it matter? The question landed with the weight of inevitability. You've run to 14 different towns in 18 months. You've used 6 different names. You've worked cash jobs and lived in places like this. The disdain in his voice was palpable, because you thought it would keep you invisible. But Elena, you can't hide from family, and you can't change the fact that the boy in that room is my nephew's son, my blood. Adrian's hand tightened in hers. Elena looked down at him, saw the question in his eyes. What do we do, Mama? She'd spent 18 months protecting him. 18 months choosing flight over fight because she was one woman with no resources against an organization that had resources without limit. But standing here now, in this decaying room that smelled of mildew and defeat, Elena realized something she'd been avoiding since the day she ran. This moment had always been coming. If I open the door, she said slowly, you'll stay in the doorway. You don't come inside. Agreed. She took a breath that felt like swallowing glass, then moved to the door. Her hand trembled as she threw the deadbolt and turned the handle. The man who stood in the doorway made the cramped motel room feel even smaller by comparison. Dominic Romano was tall, easily 6'3", with the kind of presence that filled space before his body even entered it. He wore a black wool coat that probably cost more than every possession Elena owned combined, and beneath it, a suit that fit him like it had been sewn directly onto his frame. His hair was dark, threaded with gray at the temples, and his face was all sharp angles and hard lines. A face built for command, for decisions that didn't allow for doubt. But it was his eyes that stopped her breath. Dark, calculating, and absolutely focused on her with an intensity that felt like being cataloged and assessed in a single glance. Not cruel, but not kind either. Just aware. Seeing everything, missing nothing. Elena Russo, he said, and his voice in person carried even more weight than it had through the door. Thank you for being reasonable. I'm not being reasonable, she shot back, keeping her body angled to block his view of Adrian. I'm being cornered. There's a difference. His mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement of her defiance. Fair enough. What do you want? To talk, to explain the situation. His eyes shifted past her briefly, landing on Adrian, and something flickered in his expression. Recognition, perhaps? Or possession? And to bring you both home. We don't have a home. You do, he corrected. You've always had one. You just chose to refuse it. Elena's jaw tightened. I chose to protect my son. From what? The question came sharp. From family? From security? From the legacy he was born into? From this. She gestured between them. From men in expensive suits who show up in the middle of the night making demands. From a world that got my husband killed. Marco died because he was reckless, Dominic said, and there was no grief in his voice, only cold assessment. He took unnecessary risks to prove himself. That's not the world. That's one man's poor judgment. The casual dismissal of her dead husband's life sent fury through Elena's chest. Get out! No. I said, I heard you. Dominic's voice remained level, immovable. But we're not done. Sit down, Elena. This conversation is going to take more than 30 seconds. I don't take orders from you. Then consider it a suggestion. He shifted his weight slightly, and Elena realized with cold certainty that he had no intention of leaving until he'd said what he came to say. You can stay standing if you prefer, but your son looks tired, and this floor is cold. Elena glanced back. Adrian had moved to sit on the edge of the bed, watching the stranger in the doorway with solemn curiosity. Her protective instincts warred with pragmatism. Finally, she moved to sit beside Adrian, pulling him close. Dominic's eyes tracked the movement with something that might have been approval. I'll make this simple, he began. Marco is dead. He died without legitimate heirs except for Adrian. That makes your son the last direct bloodline of the Russo branch of the family. Do you understand what that means? It means you want to take him from me. It means he belongs with us, Dominic corrected. It means he has a birthright, property, inheritance, protection that you're denying him by running. I'm protecting him from becoming what Marco was. And what was Marco? The question came with an edge. A man who loved you? Who gave you this child? Who worked to keep you sheltered from the realities of our world because he thought you were too fragile to handle them? Each word landed like an accusation. Elena's hands curled into fists. Marco lied to me, she said quietly, about everything. He protected you, Dominic countered. There's a difference. He wanted you to have a normal life, even if his couldn't be. He failed, obviously, but his intentions were good. Good intentions don't change what he was. No, Dominic agreed. They don't, but they don't change what Adrian is either. That boy is Romano blood. He's entitled to everything that comes with that name, the good and the bad. I don't want your money. This isn't about money. Dominic's voice dropped, taking on a quality that made Elena's spine straighten instinctively. This is about family, about obligation, about the fact that you can run to 100 more towns, use 100 more fake names, and it won't change the reality of who that child is. He's my son. He's also my nephew's son, Marco's mother's grandson, the last piece of her only child. Dominic paused, letting that sink in. Isabella Romano has been patient. She's given you 18 months to grieve, to process, to come to your senses. But patience has limits, Elena, and those limits have been reached. Fear spiked through Elena's chest. Is that a threat? It's a fact. Dominic's expression didn't change. You can cooperate or you can fight, but if you fight, you'll lose. The family has resources you can't imagine, lawyers who can make custody battles disappear in your favor or against it, investigators who can find you anywhere, connections that reach into every system you might try to use for protection. You can't just take him. We won't have to take him. Dominic leaned against the doorframe, somehow making the casual posture look authoritative. We'll simply prove that you're an unfit mother, unstable, moving constantly, no permanent residence, working under false identities, keeping a child out of school, away from medical care, living in— His eyes swept the room with obvious distaste. Places like this. I've kept him safe. You've kept him hidden, Dominic corrected. There's a difference. Safety isn't living in fear, Elena. Safety is having resources, protection, and power enough that fear becomes irrelevant. Your kind of power got Marco killed. And your kind of running will get Adrian nothing but a childhood spent looking over his shoulder. Dominic straightened, his full attention fixing on her like a spotlight. Is that what you want for him? To grow up the way he has been? Always moving, never settling, learning that home is whatever room you can afford for a week? The words cut deeper than Elena wanted to admit. She looked at Adrian, saw him watching her with those two old eyes, and felt something crack in her chest. What do you want from me? She asked, and hated how defeated she sounded. Come back to New York, Dominic said simply. Let Isabella meet her grandson. Let Adrian know his family. Raise him in the world he was born into. And if I refuse? Then we pursue legal custody. It won't be pleasant, and you won't win. But you'll force us to take the hard path. and that will make the eventual outcome much more difficult for everyone, especially Adrian. Elena's hands shook. She pressed them against her knees, trying to steady herself. You're asking me to surrender. I'm offering you a choice. Dominic's tone softened fractionally. Return willingly, and you remain Adrian's mother. You raise him. You make decisions about his life. The family provides resources, protection, education, everything he needs. You're not a prisoner, Elena. You're family. And if I come back and change my mind, then you'll find that family business can be complicated to leave. The words were delivered without menace, just flat truth. But I don't think you'll want to leave. Once you see what we can offer Adrian, what his life can be, I think you'll understand why running was never the answer. Elena closed her eyes. 18 months. 18 months of fear, exhaustion, and constant vigilance. 18 months of watching Adrian grow up in motel rooms and sleeping in cars, of working jobs that paid under the table and living like they were already ghosts. She thought of the dream she'd been having when the headlights woke her. Adrian in sunlight, laughing without fear. If I agree, she said slowly, opening her eyes to meet Dominic's steady gaze, I need guarantees. Such as? Adrian stays with me. Always. I'm not negotiating custody or sharing him with Isabella or anyone else. Agreed. I make decisions about his education, his health, his life. Within reason, Dominic allowed. If your decisions put him at risk or deny him opportunities the family can provide, we'll have discussions. Discussions, Elena repeated. Not demands. Discussions, Dominic confirmed. I'm not interested in making you an enemy, Elena. Cooperation is always preferable to conflict. What about me? What happens to my life? You'll live at the estate. You'll have your own space, your own resources. You're not a servant or a guest. You're Adrian's mother. That position carries weight. And obligations? Some, Dominic admitted. You'll be expected to attend family functions, to present a united front, to understand that what you do reflects on the family. But you won't be asked to participate in business that makes you uncomfortable. Elena wanted to laugh at the careful phrasing. Business that makes me uncomfortable. You mean crime. I mean business, Dominic said flatly. Our world operates differently than the one you're used to. But you won't be asked to participate beyond understanding that it exists. Like Marco tried to protect me from understanding. Marco was a fool, Dominic said bluntly. He thought he could have two separate lives, the family business and a normal marriage. It was never going to work. But his mistakes don't have to be yours. I'm offering you honesty, Elena, full knowledge of what you're walking into. And what am I walking into? Dominic studied her for a long moment. Power, he said finally. Legacy. Protection. A world where Adrian will want for nothing, where his name opens doors instead of forcing him to hide. But also obligation, expectation, and the understanding that family loyalty isn't optional. That sounds like a prison with better furniture. That sounds like every family on Earth, Dominic countered. The only difference is scale and stakes. Elena's laugh came out bitter. The stakes being life and death. Sometimes, Dominic acknowledged. But isn't that already true? You're running from us. But what happens when you run into someone else's territory? When some other family decides that Marco's widow and son are useful leverage? You think hiding protects you, but it just makes you vulnerable to different threats. The truth of it settled over Elena like snow, cold, heavy, and impossible to brush away. I need time to think, she said. You have until dawn. Dominic checked his watch. It's 6 o'clock now. The sun rises at 7:43. When it does, I'm leaving for the airport. You and Adrian can be on the plane with me, or I can leave alone and let the lawyers handle the rest. That's not enough time. It's more than enough time to acknowledge what you already know. Dominic's eyes held hers. You can't keep running, Elena. And even if you could, do you want to? Look at your son and tell me honestly, is this the life you want for him? Elena looked at Adrian. He'd curled against her side, thumb in his mouth, a habit he'd reverted to 6 months ago when they'd had to leave Cleveland in the middle of the night. His clothes were clean but worn, his shoes had holes in them, and his eyes held a wariness that no 4-year-old should possess. She thought of the dream again, sunlight and laughter. If I do this, she whispered, if I agree to come back, I need to know one thing. What? Why? Elena met Dominic's gaze directly. Why does it matter so much? You said it yourself, Marco was reckless. He died because of his own choices. Why do you care about his son? For the first time since he'd appeared in her doorway, something shifted in Dominic's expression. Not softness, exactly, but something human beneath the armor. Because family is all we have, he said quietly. In our world, loyalty is currency, and blood is bond. Adrian is the last piece of my nephew, the last piece of my sister's only child. He's not just a child, Elena. He's continuity, legacy, the proof that what we build survives beyond us. That's a lot of weight for a 4-year-old. He won't carry it alone. Dominic's voice carried absolute certainty. He'll have the family, resources, protection. And if you come willingly, he'll have you, the one person who actually loves him rather than what he represents. The admission surprised her. You don't love him. I don't know him, Dominic corrected. Love requires knowing someone, but I value him. I value what he is and what he can become. And I respect you enough to be honest about that distinction. Elena wanted to hate him for the coldness of it, but there was something almost refreshing in his directness. No false sentiment, no manipulation, just clear truth. I need to talk to Adrian, she said. Dominic nodded. I'll wait in the car. You have until sunrise. He turned to leave, then paused. Elena? What? For what it's worth, I respect what you've done. 18 months of running, protecting your son. It took courage. Misguided courage, perhaps, but courage nonetheless. That strength will serve you well in our world. Use it wisely. Then he was gone, the door closing behind him with a soft click that somehow felt more final than a slam. Elena sat in the silence, feeling Adrian's weight against her side and the weight of the decision crushing down on her shoulders. Mama? Adrian's voice was small. Who was that man? Family, Elena said, the word tasting strange on her tongue. He's your father's uncle. Is he bad? The question froze her. Was Dominic Romano bad? By conventional morality, almost certainly. But by the morality of survival, of protection, of being powerful enough that the world bent to accommodate you rather than crushing you beneath its weight. I don't know, baby, she admitted, but I think he might be necessary. Adrian considered this with the seriousness he brought to everything. Are we going with him? Would you want to? Elena asked. If we did, we'd stop moving. We'd have a real home. You'd go to school, have your own room, Would you be there? The simplicity of it broke something in her chest. After 18 months of running, of fear, of uncertain futures, what Adrian needed wasn't safety or wealth or legacy. He needed her. Yes, Elena promised. If we go, I'll be there. Always. Then I don't mind. Elena pulled him close, breathing in the scent of his hair and fighting back tears. How had this become her life? How had she gone from an ordinary woman with ordinary dreams to someone making impossible choices in a freezing motel room on Christmas Eve? But she knew the answer. She'd married into this world without knowing it. She'd borne a child who carried this world in his blood. And now that world had come to collect what it considered its own. The question wasn't whether she could keep running. The question was whether running had ever been anything but delayed surrender. Elena stood, moving to the window. Outside, dawn was beginning to paint the eastern sky with pale light. The SUV sat motionless in the parking lot, patient and inevitable. She thought of Isabella Romano, the cold matriarch who'd stood dry-eyed at her son's funeral. She thought of the estate Marco had mentioned once or twice, casual references to the family house that Elena now understood meant something far grander than she'd imagined. She thought of lawyers and legal battles, of resources she couldn't match and power she couldn't fight. But mostly, she thought of Adrian, of the childhood he deserved and the future he could have if she made the right choice. Or the hard choice. Or possibly, they were the same thing. When the sun finally broke the horizon, Elena Russo made her decision. She packed their few belongings in silence, moving with the efficiency of long practice. Adrian watched from the bed, accepting this sudden departure the way he'd accepted the previous 14. But this time, when Elena took his hand and opened the door, they didn't slip away into anonymous mourning. They walked directly toward the black SUV. Dominic Romano stood beside the vehicle, watching her approach with an expression that revealed nothing. But when she stopped in front of him, meeting his eyes with all the defiance she had left, something flickered in his gaze that might have been respect. "I have conditions," Elena said. "I'm listening." "Adrian's education is my choice. His friends, his activities, his life outside family obligations, I decide." "Agreed." "I want my own space in the estate. Private. Mine and Adrian's. You'll have an entire wing. And if I decide this isn't working, if I decide the family is dangerous for Adrian, I want your word that you won't stop me from leaving." Dominic was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I can't give you that." Elena's jaw tightened. Then, "But," he continued, "I can give you this. If you genuinely believe Adrian is in danger, come to me first, before you run. Let me address the threat. If I fail to protect him, then you have my word I won't pursue you when you leave." It wasn't what she'd asked for, but it was more than she'd expected. "One more thing," Elena said. "What?" "You said family loyalty isn't optional, but it goes both ways. If I'm doing this, if I'm giving up everything to come back, then I'm not a guest or a convenience. I'm family. That means I get respect, not just tolerance." Dominic's mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. "You're already showing more spine than half the family. That'll earn you respect faster than any demand." He opened the car door, gesturing for them to enter. Elena took one last look at the motel, at room 112, where she'd made the decision that would change everything. Then she lifted Adrian into the SUV and climbed in after him. The door closed with the solid thunk of expensive engineering. Inside, the vehicle was warm, leather-scented, and utterly foreign. Adrian's eyes went wide, taking in details. The screens built into the seats, the polished wood trim, the sheer space of it. "Mama," he whispered, "is this ours?" Before Elena could answer, Dominic slid into the seat across from them. "No," he told Adrian, his voice gentling slightly, "but you are mine, and that means everything I have is yours." The possessiveness in the statement should have frightened Elena. Instead, she felt something else. A strange, dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, surrendering didn't have to mean losing. The SUV pulled out of the parking lot as snow began to fall again, covering their tracks. Behind them, room 112 of the Pinewood Motel stood empty, already forgetting the woman and child who'd hidden there. Ahead, New York waited, a city of power, shadows, and a family that never forgot anything. And somewhere between the past she was leaving and the future she'd chosen, Elena Russo began the hardest journey of all, the one that led home. The private jet felt like entering another dimension, one where money had rewritten the laws of physics and comfort. Elena had seen luxury before in her marriage to Marco, but this was different. This wasn't trying to impress. This was simply existing at a level where ordinary concerns didn't apply. Adrian's hand gripped hers tighter as they climbed the stairs, his eyes wide with wonder and uncertainty. The flight attendant who greeted them wore a smile that was professionally warm but didn't quite reach her eyes. The look of someone who'd learned not to ask questions about the passengers she served. "Mr. Romano, welcome aboard. We'll be ready for departure in 10 minutes. Dominic nodded, then gestured Elena and Adrian toward the cabin. "Take any seat you like. The flight is just under 3 hours." The interior was all cream leather and polished wood, configured more like a living room than an airplane. Adrian immediately gravitated toward the window seat, pressing his face against the glass to watch the ground crew. Elena remained standing, feeling displaced in this world of casual wealth. Does the family always travel like this? When necessary. Dominic shrugged out of his coat, revealing the perfectly tailored suit beneath. Commercial flights create complications. Security, privacy, schedules. This is simpler. Simpler, Elena repeated, the word tasting absurd in her mouth. She'd spent 18 months calculating whether she could afford an extra night in a motel, and he called a private jet simpler. Dominic caught the tone in her voice, and something shifted in his expression. You'll adjust. Most people do. Most people you kidnap and force onto planes? Most people I bring into the family, he corrected without heat. Though I'll note that you walked onto this plane voluntarily, that makes this a choice, not a kidnapping. A choice made under duress isn't really a choice. No, Dominic agreed, settling into a seat across from her. But it's still better than no choice at all. And I'm giving you more options than most people in your position would receive. The casual acknowledgement of his power should have frightened her. Instead, Elena found it almost steadying. At least with Dominic, she knew where she stood. In a world where strength mattered more than fairness, and honesty was a luxury afforded only to those who could enforce their will. The engines hummed to life, a low vibration that traveled through the cabin. Adrian looked back at her, his expression caught between excitement and fear. "It's okay, baby," Elena said, moving to sit beside him. "It's just like the bus, but faster." "And higher," Adrian added solemnly. "And higher," she confirmed, buckling his seatbelt with practiced efficiency. Dominic watched the exchange with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. "He's quiet." "He's careful," Elena corrected. "He's learned to be." "That'll serve him well in our world, but he shouldn't have to be careful around family." "Is that what we are now? Family?" "You've always been family, Elena. You just spent 18 months trying to pretend otherwise." The plane began to taxi, and Elena turned her attention to the window, watching the Minnesota landscape slide past. Snow-covered fields, forgotten buildings, the kind of anonymous emptiness she'd been hiding in for too long. "Tell me about Isabella," she said quietly, not looking at Dominic. "Marco's mother. Your sister." A pause. Then, "What do you want to know?" "Everything you're willing to tell me." Elena finally met his eyes. "If I'm walking into her world, I need to understand what I'm facing." Dominic considered her for a long moment, then leaned back in his seat as the plane lifted into the air. "Isabella is formidable. She was born into this life, married into power, and has spent 60 years learning how to wield both. She doesn't forgive easily, doesn't trust quickly, and values loyalty above everything else." "Including love?" "She'd argue they're the same thing. In our world, love without loyalty is just weakness waiting to be exploited." "That's bleak. That's survival." Dominic's voice carried the weight of experience. Isabella lost her husband to a rival family when Marco was 12. She could have retreated, could have let the family dissolve into chaos. Instead, she held it together through sheer will until I was old enough to take control. Everything she's done since has been about preserving what her husband built. And Marco? How did she feel about her son? The question landed in silence. Dominic's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She loved him," he said finally. "In her way." But Marco disappointed her. He wanted things she couldn't understand. Normalcy, distance from the business, a life that wasn't defined by family obligation. When he married you, someone from outside our world, she saw it as rejection. Elena's chest tightened. She blamed me for his choices. She blamed both of you, Marco for being weak enough to want out, and you for being the reason he tried. Dominic's gaze held steady. But Marco's death changed things. Whatever anger she felt, whatever disappointment, it died with him. Now all she has left is Adrian, the last piece of her son. So I'm just the inconvenient package he comes wrapped in. You're the mother of her grandson, Dominic corrected. That carries weight, whether Isabella wants to admit it or not. She needs you cooperative, not hostile. And despite what you think, she's not a monster. She's just a woman who's survived in a world that destroys the soft. The plane leveled off, and the seatbelt sign dimmed. Adrian immediately unbuckled and began exploring the cabin with careful curiosity, drawn to the screens and buttons with the fascination of a child who'd spent too long in spaces with nothing to discover. Elena watched him, feeling the familiar tightness in her throat. What if she tries to take him from me? What if being cooperative isn't enough? Then you fight, Dominic said simply. But you fight smart. Isabella respects strength, not submission. Show her you're not some fragile thing Marco kept sheltered. Show her you understand our world and can navigate it. Earn her respect, and she'll become your greatest ally. And if I can't, then you'll have a very difficult life. The honesty was almost brutal. But I don't think that'll happen. You've survived 18 months on the run with limited resources and no support. That takes intelligence and determination. Use those qualities in New York, and you'll surprise her. Elena wanted to believe him, but the weight of what she was flying toward felt crushing. A family she didn't understand, a world built on violence and power, a grandmother who saw her as an obstacle to her grandson. "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before she could stop it. "You could have just taken Adrian. Instead, you're giving me advice, treating me like family," Dominic finished. "Because, despite what you think, I'm not interested in creating enemies within the organization. A hostile mother raising the heir creates complications I don't need. Better to have you as an ally, or at least not an active threat." That's practical. "I'm a practical man." He pulled out a tablet, the screen illuminating his face with cold light. "You should rest. We land at noon, and the afternoon will be demanding." Elena wanted to ask more questions, wanted to understand the world she was entering with enough clarity to navigate it safely. But exhaustion was pulling at her, 18 months of interrupted sleep catching up now that she'd finally stopped running. She reclined her seat slightly, watching Adrian explore the cabin with Dominic's measured gaze tracking him. The older man hadn't moved to interact with the child, hadn't tried to force connection. He simply observed, cataloging, assessing. "He looks like Marco," Dominic said quietly. "I know. Does that bother you?" Elena considered the question. "Sometimes. When he makes certain expressions, or when he's angry and his eyes go dark, for a second, it's like Marco's standing there. But then he smiles, and he's just Adrian, just himself. Isabella will see Marco in him too. It'll make things complicated." "Everything about this is complicated." "True." Dominic glanced at her. "But complications can be navigated. It's the simple things that usually destroy us." Elena didn't have an answer to that. She closed her eyes, letting the engine's steady hum carry her toward something that wasn't quite sleep, but wasn't wakefulness either. A liminal space where the past 18 months felt both immediate and impossibly distant. When she opened her eyes again, Adrian was asleep in the seat beside her, and Dominic was speaking quietly into a phone in rapid Italian, the language Marco had sometimes used when he didn't want her to understand what he was discussing. She'd never learned it. Another way he'd kept her separate from his real life. Dominic ended the call and noticed her watching. "Isabella knows you're coming. She's preparing." "Should I be worried about what that means?" "Only if you arrive expecting warm maternal affection." He set the phone aside. "She'll test you, Elena. Probe for weakness, for leverage, for any indication that you're not strong enough to be part of this family. Don't give her ammunition." "How exactly do I do that?" "Don't apologize for protecting Adrian. Don't act grateful for being allowed back into a family you never asked to join. And most importantly, don't pretend to be something you're not. She'll see through false deference in seconds. So just be myself. Just be the woman who survived 18 months on the run and chose to walk onto this plane with her head up. That woman is strong enough to face Isabella Romano." The confidence in his voice was strange. Elena didn't feel strong. She felt terrified, exhausted, and completely out of her depth. But maybe that was what strength looked like from the outside. Maybe survival was just fear that kept moving forward anyway. The flight attendant appeared with refreshments Elena didn't want and couldn't eat. She accepted them anyway, the ritual of normal hospitality feeling absurd, 30,000 feet above reality. "Tell me about the estate," she said after the attendant retreated. "What should I expect?" Dominic's expression shifted into something that might have been pride. "The main house was built in 1924, renovated 3 times since. 40 rooms, 20 acres, security that rivals most government facilities. Isabella has the east wing, I have the west. The central areas are common space, dining room, library, offices." "And where will Adrian and I be?" "The north wing. It was being prepared for Marco and his family before he died. It's been empty since." He paused. "Isabella will likely find symbolic meaning in you occupying those rooms. Use that." "Use it how?" "Let her believe she's giving you what Marco wanted for you. It creates the illusion of generosity while actually just acknowledging reality." Dominic's smile was thin. "Politics is about managing perceptions, Elena. The truth matters less than what people believe about the truth." The cynicism should have repelled her. Instead, she filed it away as useful information. If this was the world Adrian would grow up in, she needed to understand its rules. "What about the rest of the family? Who else will I meet?" Cousins, mostly. Associates. People connected to the business in various capacities. Dominic's tone suggested the topic wasn't worth deep discussion. Most of them don't matter. They'll defer to Isabella and me, and by extension, they'll defer to you as Adrian's mother. That simple? Hierarchy usually is. Complexity comes from people fighting their place in it. The plane began its descent, and Elena's stomach dropped with it. Below, New York emerged from the clouds, a sprawl of steel and stone that looked nothing like the small towns she'd been hiding in. Adrian stirred awake, rubbing his eyes. "Mama? Are we there?" "Almost, baby." He pressed his face to the window, taking in the impossible density of the city. "It's big." "Very big," Elena agreed, "and very different from where we've been." "Will I like it?" The question pierced her. "I hope so." Dominic leaned forward slightly. "Adrian, have you ever had your own room? Your own bed that's just yours?" The boy shook his head, eyes wide. "You will now," Dominic said. "A room bigger than most of the places you've been staying, with toys, books, anything you want." "Anything?" Adrian's voice carried careful hope, the kind that came from learning not to expect too much. "Anything," Dominic confirmed. Then to Elena, "I took the liberty of having children's furniture and supplies brought in. If the selections aren't appropriate, they can be changed." The casual expense of it, furniture bought and delivered on speculation, made Elena's head spin. "That wasn't necessary. It was efficient. Adrian needs a proper room, and I wasn't going to wait for you to arrive to set it up." The plane touched down with barely a tremor, and Elena's hands clenched on the armrests. This was it. The moment where theory became reality, where the choice she'd made in that frozen parking lot became irrevocable. A black car waited on the tarmac, even larger and more imposing than the SUV in Minnesota. The driver stood beside it, ramrod straight, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp. The look of security that was always aware, always assessing. "That's Marcus," Dominic said as they descended the stairs into cold December air. "Head of personal security. He'll be assigned to you and Adrian." "I don't need a bodyguard." "You have one anyway. In our world, protection isn't optional. It's survival." Dominic nodded to Marcus, who opened the car door with practiced efficiency. The drive from the airport took them through parts of New York Elena had never seen in her brief time living here with Marco. Not the tourist areas or the trendy neighborhoods, but older sections where money whispered instead of shouted, where wealth was measured in legacy rather than flash. Adrian sat glued to the window, watching the city pass with wide-eyed fascination. Elena kept one hand on his shoulder, anchoring herself with his presence. "How much did Marco tell you about the family?" Dominic asked. "Almost nothing. He said his parents were gone, that he had extended family but wasn't close to them. He made it sound like normal distance, not—" She gestured at the car, the security, the unspoken power surrounding them. "He was protecting you. Badly, as it turned out, but the intention was there. Protection through lies isn't protection." "No," Dominic agreed. "It's just postponing the inevitable." But Marco never learned that lesson. He thought he could have both worlds, the family and the fantasy. It cost him everything. The words hung heavy in the air until Adrian broke the silence. "Mama, what's that building?" Elena looked where he was pointing, a massive structure of stone and iron, all Gothic arches and deliberate intimidation. "That's a church, baby." "We're not going there," Dominic said quickly. "We're going home." 5 minutes later, the car turned through iron gates that opened automatically, revealing a driveway that curved through manicured grounds toward a house that made Elena's breath catch. A state didn't do it justice. This was a manor, a declaration of power made in stone and glass. 3 stories of architectural ambition, with wings extending from the central structure like arms reaching to embrace or imprison. Elena couldn't tell which. "Welcome to the Romano estate," Dominic said quietly. "Try not to look too impressed. Isabella's watching from the east windows." Elena's eyes snapped up, catching movement behind glass on the second floor. A figure, indistinct but present, watching. The car stopped at the main entrance, where staff materialized to handle luggage Elena didn't have. She climbed out with Adrian's hand in hers, feeling exposed and completely out of place in her worn jeans and clearance rack coat. The front door opened, and a woman appeared on the threshold. Isabella Romano was 70 if she was a day, but age had refined her rather than diminishing her. She wore black, elegant, expensive black that looked like it had been tailored specifically for her frame. Her silver hair was pulled back in a style that emphasized the sharp angles of her face, and her eyes were dark, intelligent, and completely focused on Adrian. Not on Elena, on the child. "Isabella," Dominic said, his tone formal. "May I present Elena and Adrian Russo?" Those dark eyes shifted to Elena for just a moment, cataloging, assessing, judging in a single glance. Then they returned to Adrian with something that might have been hunger. "So," Isabella said, her voice carrying an accent that 60 years in America hadn't entirely erased. "This is my grandson." Adrian pressed closer to Elena's leg, suddenly shy in the face of this formidable stranger. Elena felt her protective instincts surge, but she forced herself to remain calm. "Say hello, Adrian." "Hello," the boy whispered. Isabella's expression didn't soften, but something shifted in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or possession. "He has Marco's eyes," she said quietly. Then, to Elena, "And you are the woman who kept him from me for 18 months. The accusation hung in the cold air. Elena met Isabella's gaze directly, refusing to look away first. "I'm the woman who protected him," she said evenly. "The same thing I'll keep doing now." A silence stretched between them, tension building like pressure before a storm. Then Isabella's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Come inside," she said. "It's too cold for the child out here. We have much to discuss." She turned and walked into the house, clearly expecting to be followed. Dominic touched Elena's elbow lightly. "Not bad," he murmured. "She was testing you. You passed the first round. There'll be more rounds, many more. But you're still standing, and she didn't slam the door in your face. In Isabella's world, that counts as a warm welcome." Elena tightened her grip on Adrian's hand and walked into the Romano estate, feeling the weight of history and power settle over her shoulders like a cloak she hadn't asked to wear but couldn't remove. The entrance hall was exactly what she'd expected. Soaring ceilings, marble floors, art that probably cost more than most houses. But it was the atmosphere that struck her most. Not warmth or welcome, but order, control. Everything in its designated place, nothing left to chance. Isabella led them through corridors that seemed designed to disorient, finally reaching a sitting room that managed to be both elegant and intimidating. She settled into a high-backed chair that looked more like a throne, then gestured to the sofa opposite. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Elena sat, pulling Adrian close beside her. Dominic remained standing near the door, positioned between observer and participant. 18 months, Isabella began without preamble. 18 months you kept my grandson hidden. 18 months of wondering if he was safe, if he was cared for, if he even still lived. "He was always safe," Elena said firmly. "I made sure of that." "Safe?" Isabella's voice carried sharp edges. "Safe in motel rooms and temporary housing? Safe without proper medical care or education? Safe living like fugitives?" "Safe from a world that killed his father," Elena shot back. "Safe from people who would use him as a pawn in games I don't understand. Yes, we lived simply, but he was loved, protected, and free from danger." "Free from family," Isabella corrected coldly. "Free from his birthright, his heritage, his future. He's 4 years old. He doesn't need a birthright. He needs a childhood. He needs both." Isabella leaned forward slightly. "And thanks to your selfishness, he has neither." The words hit like a slap. Elena felt Adrian tense beside her, sensing the conflict even if he didn't understand it. "I'm not going to apologize for protecting my son," Elena said quietly. "You can judge me, threaten me, make me feel unwelcome in this house. But I won't apologize for doing what any mother would do. Any mother would bring her child to family after their father's death. Any mother would accept support, protection, resources. You ran because you were afraid, and that fear cost Adrian 18 months of stability. That fear," Elena said, her voice hardening, "came from watching your family at Marco's funeral, from hearing whispers about taking Adrian, about what was best for the family, from understanding that in your world, a 4-year-old child is just another asset to be controlled." "He is an asset," Isabella said bluntly, the last direct male heir of the Russo line. But he is also my blood, my grandson, the only piece of my son that survives. You think I don't know what it means to protect a child in this world? I raised Marco in this life. I kept him safe through wars you can't imagine, through threats that would have broken someone weaker. And yet he still died, Elena said softly. Your protection wasn't enough. The silence that followed was absolute. Isabella's face went pale, then flushed with something that might have been rage or grief. Elena couldn't tell which. Dominic shifted slightly, a subtle warning that Elena had crossed a line. But Isabella surprised her. Instead of erupting, the older woman's expression went cold and distant. No, she said quietly. My protection wasn't enough. Marco made choices I couldn't control, took risks I couldn't prevent. And it cost him everything. Do you think I don't carry that? Do you think I don't wake up every morning knowing my son died because I failed to teach him properly? The raw honesty in her voice made Elena's throat tighten. This wasn't the cold matriarch Dominic had described. This was a mother who'd buried her only child. I didn't mean, Elena started. Yes, you did. Isabella's voice steadied. And you're right to say it. I failed Marco, but I will not fail Adrian. That boy will grow up understanding this world, protected by it, rather than vulnerable to it. And you will help me ensure that happens, whether you want to or not. Adrian tugged on Elena's sleeve. Mama, I'm tired. The simple interruption broke the tension. Isabella's eyes softened fractionally as she looked at the child. Of course you are, she said, her voice gentling. Dominic, show them to their rooms. Elena and I will continue this conversation later. It was clearly a dismissal. Dominic moved to the door, gesturing for Elena to follow. She stood, keeping Adrian close. But before she left, she met Isabella's gaze one more time. I'll work with you, she said quietly, for Adrian's sake. But understand this. I'm his mother. Not his guardian, not his caretaker. His mother. And that means my loyalty to him comes before any loyalty to this family. Isabella studied her for a long moment. Then, unexpectedly, her mouth curved into something that might have been genuine respect. Perhaps, she said slowly, Marco chose better than I thought. We'll see. Dominic led them through corridors that seemed designed to confuse rather than guide, each turn revealing another layer of wealth so casual it stopped feeling impressive and started feeling oppressive. Adrian's hand remained locked in Elena's, his exhaustion written in every dragging step. The north wing was quieter than the rest of the house, insulated from the main areas by distance and deliberate design. When Dominic finally stopped before a set of double doors, Elena felt a strange twist in her stomach. This had been meant for her, for the life Marco had promised but never delivered. These were prepared for Marco's family, Dominic said, confirming her thoughts. Isabella kept them maintained but empty, until now. He opened the doors and Elena's breath caught despite herself. The suite beyond was larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. A living area with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking snow-covered grounds. A kitchen, small but fully equipped. Bedrooms extending from the central space like petals from a flower. Everything decorated in warm neutrals that managed to feel elegant without being cold. But it was Adrian's reaction that broke through her careful composure. The boy released her hand and walked slowly into the space, his eyes wide with wonder that bordered on disbelief. This is ours? He whispered. Your room is through there, Dominic said, pointing to the door on the left. Elena, yours is to the right. The staff already unpacked what little you brought and stocked the basics. If you need anything else, there's an intercom system. Adrian didn't wait for permission. He ran to the indicated door, pushing it open with both hands. Elena followed more slowly, her throat tight with emotions she couldn't quite name. Inside Adrian's room, her son stood frozen in the center of a space that had been designed specifically for a child, but executed with the kind of attention to detail that came from unlimited resources. The bed was child-sized but substantial, built into a structure that looked like a castle with curtained turrets and hidden compartments. Shelves lined one wall, already filled with books and toys still in their packaging. A play area occupied one corner, complete with a table sized perfectly for small hands and bins of art supplies. The windows had safety locks, the outlets were covered, and every sharp corner had been padded. It was everything a child could want, and it terrified Elena in ways she couldn't articulate. "It's too much," she said quietly. Dominic, who'd followed them in, shook his head. "It's appropriate. This is how family lives, Elena. How Adrian should have always lived. He's 4. He doesn't need a bedroom that costs more than most people make in a year. He needs to understand his place in this world, and his place comes with resources." Dominic's voice was matter-of-fact, not defensive. "You can fight against the reality of what he is, or you can accept it and teach him to use it wisely. Your choice." Before Elena could respond, Adrian turned to her with an expression that shattered her resistance. "Can I really stay here, Mama? In this room?" The hope in his voice, fragile, careful, learned from too many temporary spaces, made her eyes burn. "Yes, baby," she managed. "This is yours. Your room, your bed, your home." His smile could have powered the entire city. Elena left him to explore, stepping back into the living area where Dominic waited with the patience of someone who understood that adjusting to this world took time. "Dinner is at 7, he said. "Formal dining room. Isabella expects you both to attend." Adrian's exhausted. He needs to rest, not sit through some formal, "Then bring him for the first course and excuse him after," Dominic interrupted. "But he needs to be seen, Elena, needs to meet the family properly. Avoiding it won't make it easier." She wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. Hiding would only delay the inevitable, and Isabella had already shown she wasn't inclined toward patience. "What should I wear?" The question felt absurd, but the reality was that her entire wardrobe fit in one duffel bag, and none of it was appropriate for formal dining in a house like this. "Already handled. Check your room." Elena moved to the door Dominic had indicated, pushing it open to reveal a space that was blessedly adult, elegant but not ostentatious, with a bed that looked sinfully comfortable and another set of windows overlooking the grounds. The attached bathroom was marble and glass, and hanging in the walk-in closet was a selection of clothing that definitely hadn't been there when they arrived. "You had someone buy me clothes?" "I had someone ensure you had appropriate options," Dominic corrected. "Isabella's standards are exacting. Better to be prepared." Elena ran her hand over a dress that probably cost what she used to make in a month. The presumption should have angered her, this casual reorganization of her life, these decisions made without her input. But underneath the indignation was something else. Relief, maybe, that she wouldn't have to face this world completely unprepared. "Thank you," she said finally, the words tasting strange. "Don't thank me. This is basic hospitality." Dominic checked his watch. "I have calls to make. Rest, settle in, let Adrian explore. Someone will come for you at 6:45 to escort you to dinner." He left without waiting for acknowledgement, and Elena was alone in the quiet of the suite, with only the sound of Adrian's delighted discoveries filtering through from his room. She sat on the edge of her new bed, feeling the weight of the past 24 hours settle over her like snow. Yesterday morning, she'd been in Minnesota, convinced she could keep running forever. Now she was in a mansion in New York, wearing borrowed clothes, preparing to have dinner with the family she'd spent 18 months avoiding. The transformation felt surreal, dizzying. Her phone, the prepaid one she'd been using, sat in her pocket like a reminder of who she'd been. She pulled it out, staring at the blank screen. No calls to make, no one to contact. The Elena who'd run had been alone by necessity, isolated by fear. This Elena had resources, protection, but also expectations, obligations, and the watchful eyes of a family that saw Adrian as theirs. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Elena tensed, then forced herself to relax as a woman in her 50s appeared in the doorway, her expression professionally neutral. "Mrs. Russo? I'm Margaret, head of household staff. Mr. Romano asked me to check if you need anything." "I'm fine, thank you." Margaret's eyes traveled over Elena with the assessing gaze of someone who'd spent decades reading people. "I took the liberty of having a light meal sent up. You haven't eaten since the plane, and dinner isn't for several hours. It's in the kitchen area." The observation was stated without judgment, but Elena felt the underlying message. This household noticed everything. Her movements, her needs, her habits would all be cataloged and reported. "That's thoughtful," Elena said carefully. "Also, if you'd like someone to stay with Adrian while you rest or bathe, I can arrange it. There's a nanny on staff." "Well, no." The word came out sharper than intended. Elena softened her tone. Thank you, but no. I'll take care of Adrian myself. Something shifted in Margaret's expression, not disapproval, but understanding. Of course, but the offer stands if you change your mind. Mrs. Romano can be exacting about evening appearances. You'll want time to prepare. The warning was subtle, but clear. Elena nodded her thanks, and Margaret withdrew with the silent efficiency of staff who'd learned not to intrude on family matters. Alone again, Elena checked on Adrian. He'd climbed into the castle bed and was examining one of the books, his eyes already heavy with the exhaustion he'd been fighting. She sat beside him, running her fingers through his dark hair. Do you like your room, baby? It's the best room ever, he said solemnly. Is it really mine? We're not leaving tomorrow? The question broke her heart. We're not leaving. This is home now. Promise? Elena pulled him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo, the cheap bottle she'd been buying at dollar stores for months. I promise. He was asleep within minutes, his small body finally releasing the tension of constant vigilance. Elena tucked him in carefully, then returned to her own room to face the reality of preparing for dinner. The closet held more options than she'd expected. Not just formal wear, but casual clothing, shoes in her exact size, even jewelry that managed to be tasteful rather than ostentatious. Someone had studied her carefully, assessed her measurements and style with precision. The level of attention was both impressive and unsettling. She selected a dress in deep blue, elegant enough for formal dining, but not so elaborate that she felt like she was playing dress-up. The fit was perfect, of course. Everything in this house was perfect, controlled, managed. The bathroom offered more luxury, heated floors, a shower with water pressure that felt like a massage, products that probably cost more per ounce than she used to spend on groceries. Elena let herself sink into the hot water, washing away 18 months of cheap motel soap and the constant grime of running. When she emerged, wrapped in a towel that was softer than any blanket she'd owned, she caught her reflection in the mirror and barely recognized herself. The woman looking back had slept in a real bed, eaten proper food, bathed in luxury. The hunted look that had become permanent in her eyes had faded slightly, replaced by something else. Not quite belonging, but not quite the outsider anymore either. She dried her hair with the expensive dryer provided, applied minimal makeup from the selection that had appeared in the bathroom drawers, and slipped into the blue dress. The woman in the mirror looked like she could navigate Isabella Romano's dining room. Whether she actually could remained to be seen. At precisely 6:45, another knock announced the escort Dominic had promised. This time it was a younger man, professionally dressed, his posture suggesting security more than household staff. Mrs. Russo, I'm here to take you to dinner. Elena woke Adrian gently, helping him into fresh clothes from the wardrobe that had been stocked in his room. He was still drowsy, leaning against her as they followed their escort through the maze of corridors. The formal dining room was everything Elena had dreaded. A table that could seat 20, set with china and crystal that probably required insurance policies. Isabella sat at the head, already present, her black dress making her look like a queen holding court. Dominic occupied the seat to her right, and several other people Elena didn't recognize filled the remaining chairs. All conversation stopped when she entered. Isabella's eyes tracked her movement with predatory focus, assessing the dress, the hair, the way Elena carried herself, looking for weakness, for cracks in the facade. Elena, Isabella said, her tone giving nothing away. Please sit. You as well, Adrian. Adrian. The indicated seats were halfway down the table, close enough to be included, far enough to know their place. Elena settled Adrian beside her, hyper-aware of every eye watching them. Family, Isabella continued, gesturing around the table. This is Elena Russo and her son Adrian, Marco's widow and son. They'll be residing in the North Wing. The introductions were brief, names and faces Elena knew she'd never remember. Cousins, business associates, people connected to the family in ways she didn't understand. They all nodded politely, but their eyes held the same assessing quality as Isabella's. Dinner was served with silent efficiency. Multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Adrian picked at his food, overwhelmed by the formality and the strangers. Elena ate mechanically, tasting nothing, focused entirely on surviving the next hour. So Elena, one of the cousins, Carmine maybe, said from across the table. 18 months is a long time to be away from family. What kept you occupied? The question was casual, but Elena heard the challenge underneath. Everyone at this table knew exactly what she'd been doing, running, hiding, keeping Adrian from them. Keeping my son safe, she answered evenly. That's always occupied me. Safe from what? Another voice asked. From family who wanted to protect him? From a world I didn't understand and people whose intentions I couldn't trust. Silence rippled down the table. Isabella's fork paused halfway to her mouth. And now? Dominic asked quietly. Do you trust us now? Elena met his gaze directly. I trust that you want what's best for Adrian. Whether that aligns with what I want remains to be seen. A low murmur of reaction. Someone, Elena couldn't see who, made a comment in Italian that sparked quiet laughter. Isabella's voice cut through it like a blade. English at the table, always. We have a guest. The laughter died. Elena realized with a strange jolt that Isabella had just defended her, in her way, established that disrespect wouldn't be tolerated. Adrian is the heir to the Russo line, Isabella continued, her voice carrying authority that demanded attention. That makes Elena the mother of the heir. She will be treated with appropriate respect in this house. Is that understood? A chorus of quiet agreement around the table. But Elena saw the looks exchanged, the subtle communications happening beneath the surface of compliance. She was accepted because she came with Adrian, but she hadn't earned her place yet. Adrian was fading fast, his head drooping against Elena's shoulder. She leaned close to Isabella. May I be excused to put him to bed? Isabella's expression softened fractionally when she looked at the exhausted child. Of course. We'll speak tomorrow. There's much to discuss. Elena stood, lifting Adrian into her arms despite the awkwardness of managing him in a formal dress. She felt every eye follow her exit, felt the weight of judgment and speculation. But she kept her spine straight, her pace measured. She wouldn't run from this room the way she'd run from everything else. The escort was waiting outside to guide them back. Adrian was asleep before they reached the north wing, his weight heavy and trusting against her shoulder. She tucked him into his castle bed, watching his peaceful face in the soft glow of the nightlight someone had thoughtfully provided. He looked happy, secure, like a child who'd finally found solid ground. Elena returned to her own room, slipping out of the formal dress and into comfortable clothes from her new wardrobe. The suite was quiet, isolated from the rest of the house by deliberate distance. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt trapped. A soft knock startled her. She opened the door to find Dominic standing in the corridor, his tie loosened but otherwise still dressed for dinner. May I come in? Elena hesitated, then stepped aside. Dominic entered, his eyes scanning the space with practiced assessment. You survived dinner. That's something. Barely. You did better than barely. You stood your ground, didn't apologize, didn't grovel. Isabella noticed. Isabella terrifies me. Good. That means you're smart. Dominic moved to the windows, looking out over the dark grounds. Fear isn't weakness, Elena. It's information. Use it. What did you really come here to say? He turned to face her. That tomorrow gets harder. Isabella will want to establish routines. Adrian's education, his schedule, his exposure to family business. She'll push boundaries, test your resolve. You need to be ready. I've been ready for 18 months. No, Dominic corrected. You've been running for 18 months. That's different. Being ready means knowing when to fight and when to compromise, when to dig in and when to bend. Isabella respects strength, but she destroys stubbornness that serves no purpose. I'm not going to let her control my son. She doesn't want to control him. She wants to shape him. Dominic's voice was patient, explaining reality rather than defending it. There's a difference. And whether you like it or not, Adrian will be shaped by this world. The question is whether you're part of that shaping or fighting against it uselessly. Elena's hands clenched. You make it sound so simple. It is simple. Not easy, but simple. Decide what matters most. Keeping Adrian completely yours but unprepared for this life, or sharing him with the family but ensuring he's equipped to survive it. You can't have both. The truth of it settled like lead in her stomach. I need time, she said quietly. You don't have time. Isabella's already planning Adrian's future. If you're not at the table when those decisions are made, you'll wake up one day and find he's become someone you don't recognize. Dominic moved toward the door, then paused. I'm not your enemy, Elena. Neither is Isabella, though she'll make you feel like she is. We all want the same thing: Adrian raised properly, prepared, protected. The only question is whether you're willing to accept what that actually means. And what does it mean? It means letting go of the fantasy that you can keep him separate from this world. He's already part of it. He always has been. Your job now is to make sure he survives it. He left without waiting for a response, and Elena was alone with the weight of impossible decisions. She checked on Adrian one more time, watching him sleep in his perfect room with his perfect toys and his perfect bed. He looked happy, safe, everything she'd wanted for him when she ran, but the price of that safety was becoming clear. Protection meant power. Power meant the family, and the family meant surrendering the life she'd imagined they could have. Simple, normal, free. Elena returned to her room, climbing into the luxurious bed that felt both wonderful and wrong. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the grounds in pristine white that looked beautiful and felt suffocating. She'd stopped running, but she was starting to realize that staying might be harder than anything she'd fled from. Sleep came slowly, interrupted by thoughts that circled like predators. By the time dawn broke over the Romano estate, Elena had made a decision. Not surrender exactly, but acceptance that the war she'd been fighting was the wrong one. The real battle wasn't about keeping Adrian away from this family. It was about making sure that when he became part of it, he didn't lose himself in the process. And that meant Elena couldn't lose herself either. She rose early, showering and dressing in clothes from her new wardrobe that felt like armor. When she checked Adrian's room, he was still asleep, so she moved quietly through the suite toward the small kitchen area. She wasn't surprised to find Isabella already there, sitting at the breakfast table with coffee and the morning papers. You're up early, the older woman observed. So are you. I don't sleep much anymore. Age, perhaps. Or habit. Isabella gestured to the empty chair. Sit. We should talk before Adrian wakes. Elena poured herself coffee, the expensive kind that actually tasted like more than caffeine, and settled across from her former mother-in-law. In the morning light, Isabella looked older than she had the night before. Tired. Human. I loved my son, Isabella said without preamble, more than I've loved anyone or anything in my entire life. When he died, part of me died with him. The raw honesty caught Elena off guard. But, Isabella continued, I'm still here. And so is his legacy. Adrian is all that remains of Marco. I need you to understand what that means to me. It means you see him as a possession, Elena said carefully, something to hold on to because you lost your son. No. Isabella's eyes flashed. It means I see him as continuation, as proof that Marco's life meant something beyond the waste of his death. But I also see him as a child who deserves better than what you've been giving him. I've given him everything I could. Love and protection, yes, but not stability, not preparation, not understanding of what he is. Isabella leaned forward. You think you're protecting him by keeping him separate from this family, but you're just making him vulnerable. Vulnerable to what? To everything. This world doesn't forgive ignorance, Elena. Marco learned that too late. He thought he could straddle both worlds, family and fantasy. It destroyed him. Don't make the same mistake with Adrian. Elena's coffee had gone cold in her hands. What are you asking me to do? Stop fighting us. Stop acting like we're the enemy when we're actually his greatest protection. Isabella's voice lost its hard edge. I'm not trying to take him from you. I'm trying to give him what he needs to survive the world he was born into. And what does he need? Education in our ways, understanding of power and how it works, connections that will protect him when I'm gone and Dominic is gone and you're gone, a foundation that lasts longer than any single life. The vision Isabella painted was seductive and terrifying in equal measure. A childhood of privilege and preparation, of understanding rather than ignorance, but also a childhood shaped by this family's values, by their world's brutal logic. I want to be part of those decisions, Elena said finally. Not just informed after the fact, actually part of them. Something shifted in Isabella's expression. That can be arranged. If you prove you understand what's required. And what's required? Loyalty. Not blind obedience, but genuine commitment to Adrian's future within this family. Can you give me that? Elena thought of Dominic's words the night before, about fighting the right battles, about choosing what mattered most. Yes, she said quietly, but with conditions. Isabella's eyebrows rose. You're negotiating with me? I'm establishing boundaries. There's a difference. A pause. Then, unexpectedly, Isabella smiled, a real smile that transformed her face from forbidding to almost warm. You have more spine than I expected. Good. Marco needed someone stronger. He needed you to be this version of yourself. She sipped her coffee. Name your conditions. Adrian's education is collaborative. We both have input. Agreed. His schedule allows for normal childhood activities, not just family obligations. Within reason. And I remain his primary parent. Not a supervisor, not a guardian. His mother, with all the authority that implies. Isabella studied her for a long moment. You'll find that authority in this family is earned, not granted. But I won't undermine your role if you don't undermine mine. We both want what's best for Adrian. We simply need to agree on what that means. It wasn't perfect, but it was more than Elena had hoped for when she'd walked into this kitchen. Then we have an understanding, she said. We have the beginning of one, Isabella corrected. Trust takes time, but this is a start. The sound of small feet padding across the floor interrupted them. Adrian appeared in the doorway, hair mussed from sleep, still wearing his pajamas. Mama? He said uncertainly, seeing Isabella and clearly remembering the formidable woman from the night before. Elena opened her arms, and Adrian ran to her, climbing into her lap with the unconscious confidence of a child who knew he was safe. Isabella watched the exchange with an expression Elena couldn't quite read. Then she stood, moving around the table with surprising grace for her age. Adrian, she said gently, kneeling so she was at his eye level. I'm your grandmother, your father's mother. Do you know what that means? Adrian shook his head, pressing closer to Elena. It means I loved your papa very much. And because I loved him, I love you too, even though we're just meeting now. The child considered this with his characteristic seriousness. Did you know my papa when he was little like me? Something cracked in Isabella's composure. Yes, I knew him his whole life. He was brave and kind, and he loved you very much. Even before you were born, he talked about you. He did? He did. He wanted you to have everything, the best life, the best future. And that's what I want for you too. Adrian looked up at Elena, seeking permission or reassurance. She nodded slightly, giving him space to navigate this new relationship on his own terms. Okay, he said finally, still cautious but less afraid. Thank you, grandmother. Isabella's eyes glistened with something that might have been tears, though she blinked them away quickly. She stood, her mask of control sliding back into place. We'll talk more later, she said to Elena. For now, get the child breakfast. The kitchen staff can prepare whatever he likes. She left without ceremony, and Elena found herself alone with Adrian, feeling like she had just navigated a minefield successfully, but wasn't entirely sure how. Is she nice, Mama? Adrian asked. Elena chose her words carefully. She's your grandmother, and she loved your father very much. That makes her family. Do we have to stay here? The question pierced her. Even with his beautiful room and his perfect toys, Adrian still expected to run. Yes, baby, Elena said firmly. We're staying. This is home now. Really, home. Adrian relaxed against her, and Elena held him close, staring out the windows at the snow-covered grounds of the Romano estate. She'd made her choice. For better or worse, they were part of this family now. The only question remaining was whether that choice would save them or destroy them. The weeks that followed settled into patterns Elena hadn't expected. Not the suffocating control she'd feared, but something more subtle. A careful dance of boundaries being tested, territory being claimed, power being negotiated in conversations that seemed casual but never were. Adrian thrived in ways that both relieved and unsettled her. The wariness that had become his baseline began to fade, replaced by the natural curiosity of a child who'd finally been given permission to be young. He explored the estate's grounds with wonder, discovered books in the library that Isabella read to him in accented English, and started asking questions about his father that Elena had been dreading. "What was Papa like when he was little?" Adrian asked one afternoon, nestled against Elena in the window seat of their suite while snow fell steadily outside. Elena hesitated, choosing words carefully. "He was kind, gentle, he liked to make people laugh. Grandmother says he was brave. He was that too. Uncle Dominic says he was reckless." Adrian's dark eyes studied her face. "What does reckless mean?" Elena's throat tightened. 3 weeks in this house, and already Adrian was collecting different versions of his father from people who'd known Marco in ways she never had. The Marco she'd married, the man who'd worked in imports and taken her to quiet restaurants, was being replaced by the Marco who'd been Romano, who'd belonged to this world of power and violence. "It means he took chances," she said finally. "Sometimes brave and reckless look the same from the outside." Adrian seemed satisfied with this answer, returning his attention to the snow. But Elena felt the shift happening, her son being claimed by a family that had known his father's reality while she'd only known his fiction. The intercom buzzed, Margaret's crisp voice filling the room. "Mrs. Russo, Mr. Romano requests your presence in his office at your earliest convenience." Elena glanced at the clock. 2 in the afternoon, Adrian's usual quiet time. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. She settled Adrian with books and strict instructions to stay in the suite, then made her way through corridors she was finally learning to navigate. Dominic's office occupied the corner of the west wing, positioned to overlook both the main entrance and a portion of the grounds, strategic placement that let him see anyone coming. His door was open. He sat behind a massive desk, reviewing documents with the focused intensity she'd learned was his default state. He looked up when she appeared, gesturing her inside without interrupting his reading. Elena waited, studying the office. It was different from the rest of the house. Less about display, more about function. Maps on the walls, filing cabinets that looked serious rather than decorative. Technology that spoke to constant communication with the world beyond these walls. "Sit," Dominic said finally, setting the documents aside. "We need to discuss something." Elena settled into the chair across from him, her guard rising automatically. "What happened?" "Nothing yet, but something will. And you need to be prepared." He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "In 2 weeks, the family is hosting a gathering, extended family, associates, people connected to our various business interests. It's an annual event, part social obligation, part strategic necessity. And you want Adrian and me there. Isabella wants you there. I agree with her assessment." Dominic's eyes held hers. "This will be your formal introduction to the broader family. People who've heard about Marco's widow and son, but haven't met you. Your presence matters." "As what? Decoration? Proof that the family is whole again?" "As the mother of the heir," Dominic said bluntly. "As someone who belongs here and isn't ashamed of that fact. People will be watching, Elena, judging whether you're strong enough for this life or just another outsider who'll crack under pressure. I've survived 18 months on the run. I think I can handle a party." "This isn't a party. It's theater." His voice sharpened. "Every conversation will have subtext. Every interaction will be assessed. People will probe for weakness, test your loyalty, try to determine if you're an asset or a liability to the family." Elena's hands tightened on the chair arms. "What do you expect me to do?" "Be yourself. The woman who stood up to Isabella and didn't apologize for protecting her son. The woman who walked into this house with her head up even though she was terrified." Dominic paused. "But also understand the game being played. Recognize when someone's testing you. Know when to engage and when to deflect." "You make it sound like warfare." "It is warfare. Just conducted over champagne and hors d'oeuvres instead of in dark alleys." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer. "I've prepared profiles on the key people you'll meet. Study them. Know who has power, who wants power, and who's dangerous regardless of their position." Elena took the folder, feeling its weight. "This is insane. This is necessary. You wanted to be part of Adrian's life in this family. This is what that means. Understanding the landscape, recognizing the players, learning to navigate complex social dynamics that carry real consequences." She opened the folder, scanning pages of names, photographs, and notes written in Dominic's precise hand. Relationships mapped out like military strategy. Allegiances noted, weaknesses identified. You expect me to memorize all this? I expect you to try. The more you know going in, the less vulnerable you'll be. Dominic stood, moving to the window. Isabella will help you prepare. She's actually quite good at this aspect of family life. The social maneuvering, the political theater, let her teach you. Since when do you and Isabella coordinate so closely? Since you arrived and gave us a common goal, making sure Adrian's mother doesn't become a liability. He turned to face her. We may not always agree, Elena, but we're aligned on this. You need to succeed at this gathering, not just survive it, but actually establish yourself as someone who belongs. The pressure of it settled over Elena's shoulders like a physical weight. And if I can't? If I mess this up? Then you'll have made enemies you can't afford and raised questions about whether you're fit to raise the heir. Dominic's honesty was brutal, but not unkind. The family tolerates weakness in peripheral members. But Adrian's mother? You're too visible, too important. Failure isn't an option. Elena left his office with the folder clutched against her chest and a growing sense that she'd underestimated what staying in this family would actually require. The past few weeks had been deceptively peaceful, settling in, establishing routines, finding her footing. But that had been the easy part. The real test was coming. She found Isabella in the library that evening, reading to Adrian from a book of Italian fairy tales translated into English. Her son was curled against his grandmother's side with complete trust, listening to stories about clever foxes and brave children with the rapt attention he gave to everything new. Isabella looked up when Elena entered, her expression softening fractionally. We're almost finished with this chapter. Then he's yours. Elena waited, watching her son absorb stories from a world she didn't fully understand. When Isabella finally closed the book, Adrian protested sleepily. Tomorrow, Isabella promised. We'll read more tomorrow. Promise, grandmother? I promise. She kissed his forehead with surprising gentleness, then stood. Take him to bed, Elena. Then come back. We have things to discuss. It took 20 minutes to get Adrian through his bedtime routine and settled in his castle bed. By the time Elena returned to the library, Isabella had poured 2 glasses of wine and settled into one of the leather chairs positioned near the fireplace. Sit, she said, gesturing to the opposite chair. Dominic told you about the gathering? He gave me profiles to study. Good. That's the foundation. But you need more than information. You need strategy. Isabella handed her one of the wine glasses. The women will be the real challenge. The men will assess you quickly and move on. But the women, they'll circle like sharks, looking for blood in the water. That's a disturbing image. It's an accurate one. In our world, the men have power, but the women have influence. We shape opinions, control social dynamics, determine who belongs and who doesn't. Isabella sipped her wine. They'll want to know if you're worthy of Marco, if you're strong enough to raise Adrian properly, if you're an ally or a threat. How do I convince them I'm not a threat? You don't. You convince them you're too valuable to alienate. Isabella leaned forward. These women respect strength, despise weakness, and tolerate calculated ambition. Show them you understand the game, and they'll make space for you. Show them fear, and they'll destroy you. Elena's stomach churned. I'm not like them. I don't know how to play these games. Then learn quickly. You have 2 weeks. Isabella's voice was firm, but not unkind. I'll help you. We'll practice conversations, teach you to read subtext, show you how to deflect probing questions without appearing evasive. But you have to want this, Elena. Half-hearted effort will fail. I want to protect Adrian. Then protecting yourself is protecting him. Because if you fall, he'll be caught in the collapse. Isabella set down her wine glass. I'm not asking you to become someone you're not. I'm asking you to become the strongest version of who you already are. The woman who ran for 18 months and kept her son safe, she's formidable. Show them her. Over the next 2 weeks, Isabella proved to be a ruthless but effective teacher. They spent hours in the library, role-playing conversations Elena might encounter. Isabella played the part of various family members, testing Elena's responses, pointing out when she appeared defensive or weak, teaching her the subtle art of social combat disguised as polite conversation. Never apologize for running, Isabella instructed during one session. It makes you look guilty. Instead, frame it as protecting Adrian during a difficult time. Grief is acceptable, fear is not. But I was afraid. Then lie. Or better yet, reframe the truth. You weren't afraid, you were cautious, strategic, ensuring Adrian's safety during a period of family transition. Isabella's eyes were sharp. Words matter, Elena. How you tell your story determines how others perceive it. They practiced deflecting personal questions, navigating political discussions, even handling the subtle insults that would inevitably come wrapped in compliments. Elena learned to smile while calculating responses, to laugh at jokes that weren't funny, to read body language and tone for hidden meanings. It was exhausting. More draining than 18 months of running had been, because at least running had been straightforward. This required constant vigilance of a different kind, not for physical threats but for social traps that could destroy her standing without ever seeming hostile. Dominic joined some sessions, teaching Elena to recognize power dynamics and understand the business relationships underlying family connections. He explained which associates were trustworthy, which were ambitious, and which were dangerous regardless of their smiles. Remember, he said during one particularly intense briefing, everyone at this gathering wants something. Figure out what it is, and you'll know how to interact with them. Need drives behavior more than anything else. Adrian remained blissfully unaware of the preparation consuming his mother's days. He spent his time exploring, reading, and gradually becoming more comfortable in a house that was learning to feel like home. Isabella continued her evening story sessions, building a relationship with her grandson that Elena watched with mixed emotions. Grateful he was bonding with family, anxious about what influences were shaping him. The night before the gathering, Elena stood in her closet, staring at the dress that had been selected for her, elegant black that Isabella had insisted upon. Black says you're in mourning but not broken by it. It's respectful without being weak. She slipped it on, studying her reflection. The woman looking back seemed like a stranger, polished, controlled, ready to navigate a world she still didn't fully understand. But beneath the surface, Elena recognized the same determination that had kept her running for 18 months. The same fierce protectiveness that had made her walk onto Dominic's plane. The same strength that had let her stand up to Isabella in their first meeting. Maybe she could do this. Maybe she was stronger than she thought. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Dominic stood in her doorway, formal in a way that made him look even more intimidating than usual. "Ready?" he asked. "No, but I'll manage." He stepped into the room, studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "You look the part. That's half the battle." "What's the other half?" "Believing you deserve to be here. Not apologizing for your presence." Dominic moved closer. "Tomorrow people will test you. They'll probe, challenge, try to determine if you're worth respecting or just tolerating. Don't give them ammunition, Elena." "Isabella's been preparing me." "I know, but there's one thing she can't teach you." He paused, choosing words carefully. "How to handle me." Elena's pulse quickened. "What do you mean?" "People will be watching how we interact, drawing conclusions about power dynamics, about whether you're under family control or have agency. How you navigate that will matter." "So what should I do?" "Treat me like an ally, not an authority. We're equals in this, both interested in Adrian's future, both committed to family stability. Show that dynamic, and people will respect your position." "Are we equals?" Elena asked quietly. "Because from where I'm standing, you hold all the power." Dominic's expression shifted into something almost like respect. "Power is perception, Elena. If you act like I control you, people will believe it. If you act like we're partners with different roles, that becomes the truth that matters." He left her with that thought, and Elena spent a sleepless night rehearsing conversations, reviewing profiles, and trying to quiet the voice in her head that insisted she was completely out of her depth. The gathering began at 7. By 6:30, the house was transformed. Staff moving with choreographed efficiency, rooms open that Elena had never seen, an atmosphere of controlled anticipation humming through every corridor. Adrian was allowed to attend the first hour under strict supervision, dressed in clothes that made him look like a miniature version of the formal men. He held Elena's hand as they descended the main staircase, his eyes wide with wonder at the transformation. Isabella waited at the bottom, resplendent in burgundy silk that made her look regal rather than elderly. She assessed Elena with a single glance, then nodded approval. You'll do. Remember what we practiced. I remember. And Elena? Isabella's voice softened fractionally. You're stronger than you think. Trust that. The first guests began arriving, and Elena found herself thrust into exactly the kind of social warfare Isabella had described. Conversations that seemed pleasant but carried undercurrents of assessment. Questions about her time away that probed for weakness. Compliments that felt like insults wrapped in silk. But the preparation held. Elena deflected personal questions, reframed her narrative, and held her ground without appearing defensive. She watched body language, recognized when people were testing her, and responded with the careful balance of strength and grace that Isabella had drilled into her. An hour in, a woman named Lucia, one of the cousin's wives and noted for her sharp tongue, cornered Elena near the champagne fountain. So, Lucia said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, you're the mysterious widow who kept Adrian hidden for so long. We were all so worried. I appreciate the concern, Elena replied smoothly. It was a difficult time, but Adrian and I are exactly where we need to be now. Of course. Family is so important. Lucia's gaze traveled over Elena's dress. Isabella has excellent taste. I'm sure she helped you prepare for tonight? The implication was clear that Elena needed help, that she couldn't navigate this world without Isabella's intervention. The old Elena might have bristled, but the woman Isabella had trained recognized the test. Isabella has been generous with her wisdom, Elena said. I'm fortunate to have such a strong woman guiding me, though I suspect you understand that, having navigated these circles yourself for years. The compliment that wasn't quite deflected the probe, while establishing that Elena understood the hierarchy. Lucia's eyes sharpened with something like respect. You're learning quickly. I have good teachers and strong motivation. Elena let her gaze drift to where Adrian stood with Isabella, charming a group of older relatives with his serious answers to their questions. Everything I do is for him. As it should be. Lucia sipped her champagne. Welcome to the family, Elena. Truly. The dismissal was polite but final. Elena had passed whatever test Lucia had been conducting. As the woman moved away, Elena felt a small surge of triumph, one battle won in a war that would never truly end. Dominic appeared at her elbow, his presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. Lucia seems satisfied with you. She tested me. I didn't fail. No, you didn't. His voice carried approval. You're doing well, Elena. Better than I expected. Don't sound so surprised. I'm not surprised. I'm impressed. There's a difference. He guided her subtly away from the crowd toward a quieter corner. But the real challenge is coming. See that man near the fireplace? Carlo Benedetti. He's been trying to expand his influence within the family for years. He'll test you differently than the women did. Elena studied the man. Late 50s, expensive suit, eyes that missed nothing. What does he want? To determine if you're an asset he can cultivate or an obstacle he needs to work around. Dominic's voice was low, meant only for her ears. He'll be charming. Ask about Adrian's future. Probe for your ambitions. Don't give him leverage. Meaning what? Meaning don't reveal anything about Adrian's education, your plans, or your relationship with Isabella. Keep it vague, redirect to his own family, make him work for every piece of information. Before Elena could respond, Carlo was approaching with a smile that seemed genuine but felt calculated. Elena Russo, he said warmly. Finally, we meet. I knew your husband, fine man, tragic loss. Thank you, Elena said, her guard rising automatically. Marco spoke highly of many family members, though I confess he didn't mention you specifically. The subtle jab, suggesting Carlo wasn't important enough to mention, landed with precision. Carlo's smile tightened fractionally. Marco and I moved in different circles. But Adrian, he's the future, isn't he? I hope you're thinking carefully about his education, his preparation for the role he'll eventually fill. I think about Adrian's future constantly, Elena replied, though I imagine many people have opinions about what that should look like. Indeed, a child in his position needs careful guidance, the right influences. Carlo's tone was pleasant, but Elena heard the probe underneath. I hope you're open to advice from those of us who've been in this family longer. I'm always open to wisdom from those who've earned respect through their actions, Elena said carefully. Though ultimately, decisions about Adrian's life rest with his mother and grandmother, as I'm sure you understand. The message was clear. Carlo could offer opinions, but he had no authority. His eyes sharpened, reassessing her with new calculation. Of course, family hierarchy must be respected. He inclined his head slightly. You're more astute than rumors suggested. I look forward to future conversations, Elena. He withdrew, and Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Dominic's hand touched her lower back briefly, a gesture that could have been casual but felt like approval. Well played. He was testing whether I'd defer to him. And you established your position without being overtly hostile. That's the balance you need. Dominic guided her back toward the main room. You're surviving this, Elena. Actually thriving. The evening wore on, conversation after conversation, test after test. By the time Adrian grew tired and Elena was allowed to excuse herself to put him to bed, she felt wrung out but oddly triumphant. She'd navigated the gathering without major missteps, established herself as more than just Marco's widow, and earned grudging respect from people who'd expected her to fail. Isabella found her in the hallway outside Adrian's room after the boy was finally asleep. You did well tonight, the older woman said without preamble. Better than well. You showed them you're not some fragile thing to be managed. Several people commented on your presence. Thank you for preparing me. I gave you tools. You wielded them. Isabella's expression was as close to warm as Elena had ever seen it. Marco chose better than I thought. You have the strength this family needs, even if you came to it differently than I would have preferred. It was the closest thing to approval Elena had received from her, and the weight of it was surprising. I'm not doing this for your approval, Elena said quietly. I'm doing it for Adrian. I know, that's why it matters. Isabella turned to leave, then paused. But Elena, tonight was the easy part. You impress people who are willing to be impressed. Maintaining that position, earning genuine respect rather than cautious acceptance, that's harder. Don't let tonight's success make you complacent. She left Elena alone in the quiet hallway, the sounds of the party continuing floors below. Through Adrian's door, she could hear his soft breathing, peaceful and secure in a way he'd never been during their months of running. Elena returned to her room, slipping out of the elegant dress and into comfortable clothes. She stood at the window, looking out over the estate's grounds, where security moved in careful patterns and lights blazed against the winter darkness. She'd survived the gathering, proven she could navigate this world's complex social dynamics, established herself as someone who belonged rather than someone who was merely tolerated. But Isabella's warning echoed in her thoughts. Tonight had been theater, controlled, prepared for, rehearsed. Real life in this family would be messier, more unpredictable, filled with challenges she couldn't anticipate or prepare for. The question wasn't whether she could survive one night of social warfare. The question was whether she could sustain this performance for years, raising Adrian in this world while keeping both of them intact. A soft knock startled her. When she opened the door, Dominic stood there with 2 glasses and a bottle of wine. "May I?" he asked. Elena stepped aside, letting him enter. He poured wine without asking permission, handing her a glass before settling into the chair near the window. "You surprised a lot of people tonight," he said. "Including you?" "Especially me." He sipped his wine. "I knew you were strong. I didn't know you were strategic. There's a difference. Isabella taught me well. Isabella gave you framework. You provided the execution." Dominic's gaze held hers. "You're not just surviving in this family, Elena. You're carving out a position, building influence. That's dangerous and valuable in equal measure." "Dangerous how?" "Because influence attracts attention. People will start seeing you as more than just Adrian's mother. They'll see you as a player in family dynamics. That brings opportunity and threats." Elena's throat tightened. "I don't want to be a player. I just want to protect my son." "Too late. You've already become one." Dominic leaned forward. "But that's not necessarily bad. Players have agency. They make choices instead of having choices made for them. The question is whether you're ready for what that means." "Which is?" That you'll need allies, real ones, not just people who tolerate your presence. His voice lowered. I'm offering to be one of those allies, Elena. Not because I have ulterior motives, but because I respect what you're building and believe you could be genuinely valuable to this family's future. The offer hung between them, weighted with implications Elena was too tired to fully parse. Why? She asked simply. Because you're not what I expected. You're stronger, smarter, more adaptable. And because Adrian will need people around him who actually care about his well-being rather than just his position. You're building that foundation. I want to help. Elena studied him. This man who'd dragged her back into a world she'd fled, who'd offered choices that weren't really choices, who'd been simultaneously her captor and her guide through this family's complexities. If I accept your alliance, she said carefully, what does that mean practically? It means I watch your back in family politics, guide you through situations Isabella can't or won't address, provide perspective from someone who understands the business side of our world, not just the social dynamics. He paused. And it means you trust me enough to be honest when you're struggling instead of pretending you have everything under control. The vulnerability required for that kind of trust felt impossible. But Elena was learning that survival in this family meant taking calculated risks. All right, she said finally. Allies. Dominic's mouth curved into something almost like a genuine smile. You won't regret this. I hope not. He stood to leave, then turned back at the door. You did remarkable work tonight, Elena. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. You earned your place here. After he left, Elena sat alone with her wine, feeling the shift that had occurred. She'd arrived at this house as a fugitive being dragged back. Tonight, she'd established herself as something else, a member of the family with standing, with influence, with a voice that mattered. But the cost of that transformation was becoming clear. She wasn't just Elena Russo anymore, the woman who'd run to protect her son. She was becoming someone new, someone who navigated complex power dynamics, who built alliances and defended territory, who played the games this family required. The question that kept her awake long after she should have slept was simple and terrifying. In becoming strong enough to protect Adrian in this world, was she becoming exactly the kind of person she'd once run from? The answer to that question came 6 months later, on a spring evening when the estate's gardens had finally shaken off winter's grip and cherry blossoms painted the grounds in soft pink. Elena stood in Dominic's office, her hands shaking with fury she was barely containing. Between them on his desk lay photographs, grainy surveillance images of Adrian at the private academy Isabella had enrolled him in, taken from angles that suggested someone had been watching her son for weeks. When did these arrive? Her voice was ice over rage. This morning, delivered to the front gate in an unmarked envelope. Dominic's expression was carved from stone, but his eyes held a violence that Elena had never seen directed at anything connected to her. No note, no demands, just the photographs. Who would do this? Someone making a point, showing they can reach Adrian whenever they want. He gathered the photographs with careful precision, as if handling something contaminated. This is a message, Elena. A warning that the family has enemies who know about the heir. The word hit her like a physical blow. For 6 months, she'd been learning to navigate this family's internal politics, building relationships, establishing her position. But she'd allowed herself to believe that the external threats, the violence that had killed Marco, belonged to a past she'd left behind. What do we do? The question came out steadier than she felt. We respond, carefully, strategically, and with enough force that whoever sent these understands that threatening Adrian was a fatal mistake. Dominic's voice carried absolute certainty. But first we need to tell Isabella. Elena's stomach dropped. She'll blame me. She'll say I brought danger to Adrian by running, by making him visible. She'll blame whoever took these photographs, Dominic interrupted. And then she'll help us eliminate the threat. Whatever else Isabella is, she's a grandmother who won't tolerate anyone endangering her grandson. They found Isabella in the conservatory, reading in the afternoon light that filtered through glass walls. She looked up when they entered, and whatever she saw in their faces made her set down her book with deliberate care. Show me, she said simply. Dominic laid the photographs on the small table beside her chair. Isabella studied each one with an expression that grew colder and more dangerous with every image. When she finally looked up, Her eyes held the same violence Elena had seen in Dominic's. How long has this been happening? Based on the timestamps, at least 3 weeks. Dominic's tone was clinical, reporting facts rather than engaging emotion. Multiple angles, different times of day. Whoever's behind this has dedicated resources to surveillance. Carlo Benedetti. Isabella's voice was flat with certainty. He's been pushing for more influence over Adrian's education. This is him showing what he's capable of if he doesn't get his way. Elena's breath caught. The man from the gathering? He seemed charming, respectful. Isabella's laugh was bitter. Carlo has been playing power games in this family for 30 years. He saw Adrian as an opportunity. Influence the heir, control the future. When you established that he had no authority over the boy, you made him your enemy. I didn't know. You weren't supposed to know. That's how these games work. Isabella stood, her age falling away as purpose sharpened her movements. But Carlo miscalculated. He thought threatening Adrian would make you vulnerable, make you run to him for protection. Instead, he's given us justification to destroy him. The casual way she said it, destroy him, sent ice through Elena's veins. What does that mean? It means Carlo Benedetti will learn that there are consequences for threatening family. Isabella's gaze shifted to Dominic. Call Marcus. I want security doubled at the academy and at the estate. No one gets close to Adrian without clearance from you or me directly. Already done. I also want to move Elena and Adrian to the secure wing until this is resolved. The secure wing? Elena looked between them. What is that? The section of the house built specifically for situations like this, Dominic explained. Reinforced walls, independent power and water, security measures that would make most government facilities jealous. You and Adrian will be completely protected while we handle the threat. Handle it how? Elena's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. What are you planning to do to this man? Isabella's expression was almost pitying. You've been in this family for 6 months, Elena. You've learned to navigate our social dynamics, built alliances, established your position. But you've never truly understood what we are, have you? I understand you have power. We have more than power. We have the ability and will to protect what's ours through any means necessary. Isabella moved closer, her voice dropping to something almost gentle. Carlo threatened your son, my grandson, the heir to this family's legacy. That's not a political miscalculation. It's a declaration of war. And wars end with someone defeated. The reality of what she was saying crystallized slowly. You're going to kill him. We're going to neutralize a threat, Dominic corrected. What form that takes depends on Carlo's response when we confront him. If he's smart, he'll understand his mistake and accept exile from family business. If he's foolish, he'll double down. And then yes, more permanent measures will be necessary. Elena's knees felt weak. She'd known, intellectually, that this family operated outside conventional morality. Marco's death had proven that violence was part of their world, but knowing it abstractly and watching it unfold around her son were entirely different things. I don't want Adrian exposed to this, she whispered. Then you shouldn't have stayed, Isabella said bluntly. The moment you walked back into this family, you accepted that Adrian would grow up in a world where power is defended with force. You can't have the protection and resources we offer without accepting the reality of how they're maintained. Isabella, Dominic's voice carried warning. No, she needs to hear this. Isabella's eyes were hard on Elena's face. You've been playing at being part of this family, learning our social rules, building your position, protecting Adrian through political maneuvering. But real protection, the kind that keeps a child safe from people who would use him as leverage, requires darker choices. If you can't accept that, then you need to leave now, before Adrian gets any more attached to this life. The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke. Elena felt her carefully constructed world tilting, forcing her to confront the question she'd been avoiding for 6 months. Could she stay in a family that would kill to protect its own? Could she raise Adrian in a world where violence was a tool used as casually as social pressure? But the alternative rose in her mind with equal clarity, running again. Adrian torn away from the stability he'd finally found, from the grandmother who read him stories and the life he was learning to love. Returning to cheap motels and constant fear, but this time with enemies who knew exactly who they were and where to look. I'm not leaving, Elena said finally, the words feeling like stepping off a cliff. But I need you to promise me something. We're not in a position to negotiate, Isabella said sharply. Yes, we are. Because you need me cooperative, not resentful and terrified. Elena forced strength into her voice. If you're going to do this, handle Carlo or anyone else who threatens Adrian, I need to know what you're doing. Not the details, but enough that I'm not blindsided. I can't protect Adrian if I don't understand the threats around him. Dominic and Isabella exchanged a look Elena couldn't interpret. That's a significant request, Dominic said carefully. Information is closely held in this family. Letting you into operational decisions makes me a real ally instead of just a bystander you're managing, Elena interrupted. You said you wanted me as a partner, Dominic. Isabella said I needed to understand this world. Well, I'm trying to understand, but I can't do that if you keep me in the dark whenever things get dangerous. Another silence. Then Isabella's mouth curved into something that might have been approval. You're finally asking the right questions, she said. All right, we'll keep you informed, to a point. You won't be involved in operational decisions, but you'll know enough to understand what's happening and why. Agreed? Agreed. Then let's begin your real education. Isabella gestured for them to sit. Carlo Benedetti has been consolidating power for years through legitimate business fronts and carefully cultivated political connections. He's too visible to simply disappear, too connected to handle carelessly. So we'll dismantle his foundation piece by piece until he has no choice but to withdraw. Over the next hour, Isabella and Dominic outlined a strategy that was both elegant and ruthless. Financial pressure applied through channels Carlo depended on, political allies quietly withdrawing support. Business deals falling through in ways that seemed like bad luck, but were actually carefully orchestrated sabotage. And running beneath it all, an investigation into Carlo's activities that would inevitably uncover the kind of compromising information that could destroy a man's reputation overnight. We don't need to kill him, Dominic explained. We just need to make him irrelevant. Strip away his power until threatening Adrian becomes pointless because he has nothing to leverage. How long will this take? Elena asked. Weeks, perhaps a month. It depends on how quickly he realizes what's happening and whether he's smart enough to surrender. Isabella's eyes were cold. But in the meantime, you and Adrian moved to the secure wing tonight. No arguments. The secure wing turned out to be less a wing and more a self-contained residence built into the estate's oldest section. Elena and Adrian's new temporary quarters were smaller than their suite, but felt safer. Reinforced doors that locked from the inside, windows that were actually bulletproof glass, security systems that Dominic personally demonstrated. Adrian adapted with the resilience of a child who'd learned early that life sometimes required sudden changes. He explored their new space with curiosity, asking questions about why they needed such strong locks and accepting Elena's simplified explanations with his characteristic seriousness. Are we in danger, Mama? He asked that first night, curled against her side in the unfamiliar bed. We're being careful, Elena said carefully. There are people who don't like that our family is powerful, so we're staying somewhere extra safe until Uncle Dominic and Grandmother make sure we're protected. Oh, will they hurt the bad people? The question froze Elena. At 5 years old, Adrian was already learning to categorize the world in terms his father's family would recognize. People who were family, and therefore protected, and people who were threats, and therefore acceptable targets. They'll make sure the bad people can't hurt us, she said, choosing words carefully. Sometimes that means fighting, sometimes it just means being smarter and stronger. Adrian seemed satisfied with this answer, drifting to sleep with the trust of a child who believed the adults around him were powerful enough to keep him safe. Elena lay awake long after Adrian slept, feeling the weight of her choices settling over her like a shroud. She'd asked to understand this world, and Isabella had granted that request. Now she was watching in real time as the family dismantled a man's life with surgical precision, all to protect Adrian from a threat Elena had partly created by establishing her own position too firmly. The days that followed played out with surreal normalcy on the surface, while violence simmered beneath. Adrian continued his academy schedule under heavy security. Elena attended family dinners where conversation carefully avoided mentioning Carlo, even as his empire crumbled. And at night, Dominic briefed her on the day's progress, with the clinical detachment of a general reporting from the field. Carlo's largest investor pulled out this morning, citing concerns about irregularities in his accounting. The investigation we seeded is bearing fruit. Dominic's voice was matter of fact, discussing financial destruction the way others might discuss the weather. He's losing approximately $30 million in capital, and the political connections that depended on that money are starting to distance themselves. Does he know it's us? Elena asked. He suspects, but suspicion without proof is just paranoia. And the beauty of this approach is that even if he's certain we're behind it, there's nothing he can do. Fighting back would just accelerate his collapse. 3 weeks into the operation, Carlo made his move. Elena was reading to Adrian in the secure wing's small library when Marcus appeared in the doorway, his expression grim. Mrs. Russo, Mr. Romano needs you in his office immediately. Adrian stays here with security. Her stomach dropped. What happened? Carlo showed up at the front gate demanding to speak with Isabella. He's making threats. Elena's hands tightened on the book she'd been reading. Is he armed? Unknown, but he's desperate, and desperate men do stupid things. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. You need to come now. Dominic wants you present for this conversation. She kissed Adrian's forehead, told him to stay with the guards, and followed Marcus through corridors that seemed longer than usual. Her heart hammered against her ribs, fear and something else, a strange, cold fury that anyone would come to this house making threats against her son. Dominic's office had been transformed into something like a war room. Security monitors showed Carlo, at the gate, pacing like a caged animal. Isabella sat in one of the chairs, her face expressionless, and Dominic stood at the window, radiating the kind of controlled violence that made even the air feel dangerous. Elena, he said without turning. Good. You should hear this. He pressed a button, and Carlo's voice filled the room through speakers connected to the gate's intercom. I know you're listening, Isabella. Dominic, I know what you've been doing, and I know why. But threatening me won't change anything. I have information, insurance, that will destroy this family if anything happens to me. Isabella's laugh was cold. Carlo, you've been watching too many films. Real power doesn't work that way. I have evidence of every illegal transaction this family's made for the past decade. Financial records, communications, connections to politicians and judges. If I go down, I'm taking the Romano Empire with me. Then you've already lost, Dominic said quietly. Because if that information exists, we'll find it. And once we do, your insurance becomes worthless. You can't find what's already been distributed. I have copies in 3 different locations set to be released if I don't check in every 48 hours. Kill me, and you destroy yourselves. Elena watched Isabella's expression carefully. The older woman showed no fear, no concern, just cold calculation. Carlo, Isabella said finally, you're bluffing. If you had that information and were smart enough to protect it properly, you'd have used it already as leverage instead of showing up at my gate like some common thug. Try me. Do whatever you were planning and watch your family burn. Or, Dominic interjected, his voice carrying absolute authority, you could listen to the offer we're about to make, the one that lets you walk away from this alive and with some dignity intact. A pause. Then, I'm listening. You leave, tonight. You take your remaining assets, disappear to whatever hole you've been preparing for exactly this situation, and you never come near this family again. Never contact Adrian, never mention the Romanos, never return to New York. In exchange, we stop the financial assault and let you keep what you've managed to hide from us. And the photographs? My insurance? We assume it's a bluff, but we're willing to take that risk, because if it's real and you release it, you'll spend the rest of your very short life knowing you destroyed the only thing that was keeping you alive, our willingness to let you run rather than hunting you down. Dominic's voice dropped to something deadly. Make no mistake, Carlo. If that information surfaces, there won't be a place on earth you can hide. We'll find you, and what happens next will make you wish you'd taken the easy death we're offering now. Silence stretched through the speakers. Elena could hear Carlo's breathing, ragged with fear and rage. I want 24 hours to arrange travel. You have 12. At dawn tomorrow, if you're still in New York, the deal is void, and we come for you with everything we have. Isabella's voice was final. Choose wisely, Carlo. This is the only offer you'll receive. The intercom clicked off. Dominic turned to face Elena, his expression unreadable. That's how these things end when we're merciful. He lives, we maintain our position, and the threat disappears. Not through violence, but through superior force of will. Elena's hands were shaking. She'd just watched the family destroy a man's entire life and then offer him exile as mercy. It should have horrified her. Instead, she felt a fierce satisfaction that Adrian's threat was being neutralized. Will he actually leave? She asked. He doesn't have a choice, Isabella said. We've taken everything that gave him power. He can run and keep his life, or fight and lose everything, including his survival. Most men choose to live. And if his insurance is real? If he releases the information? Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I don't think it is. Carlo was always better at threats than follow-through. Isabella stood, smoothing her dress with practiced elegance. You can move back to your suite tomorrow, Elena. The crisis is over. But something in Dominic's expression made Elena pause. What aren't you telling me? Nothing you need to worry about. We agreed. No keeping me in the dark when it involves threats to Adrian. Dominic exchanged a look with Isabella, then sighed. Carlo won't release whatever information he has because doing so would make him worthless to everyone, including the people who might have protected him. Dead men can't provide ongoing intelligence. So his best play is exactly what we've offered. Disappear, stay quiet, and hope we forget about him. But you won't forget. No. We'll monitor him for the rest of his life. And if he makes any move against this family, any attempt to resurface or cause problems, we'll finish what we started. Dominic's voice was matter-of-fact. That's how real security works, Elena. Not through violence when it can be avoided, but through demonstrated willingness to use violence if necessary. Carlo will spend the rest of his life knowing we're watching, knowing we could reach him anytime we choose. That fear is more effective than his death would be. Elena understood finally what she'd truly committed to when she agreed to stay in this family. Not constant violence, but the infrastructure to deploy it efficiently when required. Not casual cruelty, but calculated ruthlessness in service of protection. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something settle into place, an acceptance that this was the price of keeping Adrian safe in a world that saw a 5-year-old as a strategic asset. Thank you, she said quietly, for handling this, for protecting him. Isabella's expression softened fractionally. We protect our own, Elena. That's what family means in our world. Adrian is ours, which means so are you, whether you fully accept it yet or not. By dawn the next morning, Carlo Benedetti had vanished from New York. His remaining businesses dissolved overnight, his properties went on the market, and within a week it was as if he'd never existed. The family returned to its routines with the seamless efficiency of an organization that had handled such matters countless times before. Elena and Adrian moved back to their suite in the North Wing. Life resumed its careful patterns. Adrian's academy schedule, family dinners, the social obligations that Elena had learned to navigate with increasing confidence. But something had shifted fundamentally. Elena was no longer playing at being part of this family. She'd watched them defend Adrian with cold precision, had been included in decisions about neutralizing threats, had accepted the reality of what protection actually required. She'd stopped running in more ways than one. 3 months later, on a summer evening when humidity made the air thick and thunderstorms threatened in the distance, Dominic found Elena in the estate's garden watching Adrian play with Isabella. The boy was laughing at something his grandmother had said, his dark eyes bright with happiness that seemed impossible to reconcile with the world he'd been born into. He's thriving, Dominic observed, settling onto the bench beside her. He is, despite everything, or maybe because of it. Elena glanced at him. You were right, you know, about what staying here would mean. I usually am, though it gives me no pleasure in this case. Why not? Because I've watched you transform from someone fighting this family to someone becoming part of its machinery. That shouldn't feel like victory, but it does. Dominic's voice was quiet. You've become formidable, Elena. Exactly the kind of person this family needs. But I wonder sometimes if that's what you wanted. Elena considered the question honestly. I wanted Adrian safe. I wanted to stop running. I wanted to finally stop being afraid. She watched her son chase butterflies across the manicured lawn. Everything else, the political maneuvering, the alliance building, accepting the violence that protects us, those were just necessary evolutions. And are you happy? Truly? The question surprised her. In 6 months of building her position, navigating threats, and establishing herself within the family, no one had asked her that. I'm not sure happiness is the right framework, she said slowly. But I'm stable. Adrian's protected. I have power instead of just being subject to it. That's more than I ever had when I was running. It's also more than you had in your marriage to Marco. Marco gave me illusions of safety and normal life. This family has given me actual security and honest understanding of the world Adrian belongs to. I'll take truth over comfort every time. Dominic was quiet for a moment. Then, Isabella wants to formalize your position in the family structure, give you an official role in Adrian's preparation and future planning. It would mean more responsibility, more visibility, but also more authority. Elena's heart quickened. What kind of role? Essentially, you'd be his primary advisor and protector until he comes of age, making decisions about his education, his exposure to family business, his development as the heir. Isabella and I would have input, but final authority would rest with you. Why would Isabella agree to that? 6 months ago, she barely tolerated me. 6 months ago, you were an outsider she had to manage. Now you're family she can trust. Someone who's proven you'll do whatever's necessary to protect Adrian and this family's future. She'd rather empower someone loyal than fight for control with someone resentful. The offer was everything Elena had been working toward. Real authority over her son's future, genuine power within the family structure, an end to feeling like a perpetual guest in a house that was supposed to be home. But accepting it would also be the final step in a transformation she sometimes barely recognized. From the woman who'd run from this world to the woman who wielded its power. From Marco's sheltered widow to a player in the family's complex dynamics. I need to think about it, she said finally. Take your time, but Elena, Dominic turned to face her fully. This isn't just about a title or position. This is Isabella acknowledging that you've become essential to this family's functioning. That's not an offer she makes lightly or often. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and Isabella called Adrian inside before the rain started. Elena watched them go, grandmother and grandson walking hand in hand toward the house that had become home despite everything. That night, unable to sleep, Elena found herself in the library where, 6 months ago, Isabella had first taught her to navigate family politics. The room was dark except for moonlight filtering through tall windows, painting everything in silver and shadow. She wasn't surprised when Isabella appeared in the doorway, wrapped in an elegant robe, clearly unable to sleep as well. I thought I might find you here, the older woman said, moving to pour brandy from the decanter kept stocked. She handed Elena a glass without asking if she wanted one. Dominic told you about the offer. He did. And you're conflicted. It wasn't a question. I'm trying to understand what accepting it would mean, not just practically, but what it says about who I've become. Isabella settled into the chair opposite Elena's, studying her in the dim light. You've become exactly who you needed to be to survive in this world. The question is whether you can accept that transformation. I never wanted power. I just wanted to keep Adrian safe. And you've learned that in our world, those goals are inseparable. Power is protection. Protection requires power. You can't have one without the other. Isabella sipped her brandy. When I was younger than you are now, I faced a similar choice. My husband had died, my son was young and vulnerable, and the family was fracturing around threats I barely understood. I could have run, taken Marco somewhere safe, and tried to build a normal life. But I knew that running wouldn't protect him. Only power could do that. So you stayed and became what you are now. I stayed and became what was necessary, just as you have. Isabella's eyes were sad but not regretful. I won't lie to you, Elena. This life costs. It hardens you in ways that can't be undone. You make choices that haunt you, accept compromises that change who you are, but it also gives you the strength to protect what matters most. Is that trade worth making? Only you can answer that. Elena thought of Adrian sleeping safely in his castle bed, protected by security and family power. She thought of the past 6 months, learning to navigate threats, building alliances, accepting the reality of what keeping him safe actually required. "If I accept this role," she said quietly, "there's no going back, is there? No pretending I'm just a mother protecting her son. I'd be making a deliberate choice to be part of this family's power structure." "Yes, but Elena, you made that choice 6 months ago when you agreed to help neutralize Carlo. Everything since then has just been accepting the implications of that initial decision." The truth of it settled like weight. She had chosen, back in that tense confrontation over surveillance photographs. Not explicitly, not with full understanding, but chosen nonetheless. Everything that followed, the strategic planning, the cold satisfaction when threats were eliminated, the growing comfort with the family's methods, had been building toward this moment. The moment where she stopped pretending the transformation was temporary and accepted it as permanent. "I'll do it," Elena said finally. "I'll accept the role. For Adrian." "For Adrian," Isabella agreed, "but also for yourself. Because you've earned this position, Elena. Not through birth or marriage, but through strength and strategic intelligence. That's worth acknowledging." They sat in comfortable silence, two women who'd arrived at the same destination through different paths, but with the same motivation, protecting the children they loved in a world that required darkness to survive. The formal ceremony announcing Elena's new role took place a month later, during another family gathering that was equal parts celebration and political theater. Elena wore black again, but this time it felt like armor rather than mourning. She stood beside Isabella and Dominic as the family was informed of the decision, watching their reactions carefully. Some showed approval, recognition that she'd proven herself worthy. Others showed calculation, reassessing their strategies now that she held genuine authority. But no one showed dismissal. She'd transformed from Marco's invisible widow to someone who commanded respect through demonstrated capability. Adrian was there too, dressed formally and seated in a place of honor, not quite understanding the politics, but absorbing the message that his mother was important in this family, that she belonged not just as his parent, but as a figure of authority in her own right. After the formal announcements, after the toasts and political maneuvering, Elena found herself alone on the terrace overlooking the estate's grounds. The same view she'd stared at during that first overwhelming week, when everything had felt impossible, and escape seemed like the only salvation. Dominic joined her, offering champagne she didn't really want, but accepted anyway. "How does it feel?" he asked. "Having officially become what you spent 18 months running from?" Elena laughed, surprised by the accuracy. "I wasn't running from this. I didn't even know this existed." "No, but you were running from being controlled by forces you didn't understand, and now you've become one of those forces." His tone wasn't judgmental, just observant. "That's quite a transformation." "Do you think Marco would approve of what I've become?" Dominic considered the question seriously. "Marco wanted you safe and separate from this world. He'd probably be horrified. But Marco's approach got him killed and nearly got Adrian lost in the system. Your approach has kept both of you alive and thriving. I know which version I respect more. Even if it means I've become exactly the kind of person who operates in moral gray areas. Especially because of that. Moral absolutism is a luxury our world doesn't afford. You've learned to navigate complexity, make hard choices, accept that protection sometimes requires actions you'd rather not take. That's not corruption, Elena. That's maturity." She wanted to argue, to defend some version of herself that remained untainted by the family's influence. But the truth was that the woman who'd run from Minnesota no longer existed. She'd been transformed by necessity, by love for her son, by the gradual understanding that survival required adaptation. "I still think about running sometimes," she admitted quietly. "Taking Adrian and disappearing again, finding somewhere this family's influence doesn't reach. And what stops you?" "The knowledge that there is nowhere their influence doesn't reach. But also," she paused, choosing honesty over comfort, "the realization that I don't actually want to anymore. This is home now, not despite what the family is, but including it. I've stopped fighting what we are." "We," Dominic repeated, something almost like warmth in his voice. "You said we, not them." Elena realized he was right. Somewhere in the past year, the pronouns had shifted. The family had stopped being them and become we. She'd stopped being an outsider and become integrated into the machinery of power that she'd once fled from. Is that surrender? She asked. Or evolution? Does the distinction matter? Maybe not. Maybe the only thing that matters is that Adrian's safe, I'm no longer running, and I've finally found solid ground after 18 months of chaos. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the estate's grounds. In the distance, Elena could hear Adrian's laughter as Isabella read him another story, his voice bright with the security of a child who'd finally found home. 1 year later, snow fell again over the Romano estate. But this time, Elena watched it from the comfort of her suite, with no fear of what morning would bring. No packed bags waiting by the door, no constant vigilance for threats that might appear in the darkness. Adrian was 7 now, thriving at his academy, and showing early signs of the intelligence and strategic thinking the family valued. He still asked questions about his father, but they were curious rather than mourning, a child trying to understand where he came from rather than grieving what he'd lost. Elena had grown into her role with the same determination that had kept her running for 18 months. She made decisions about Adrian's education with confidence, navigated family politics with skill that sometimes surprised even Isabella, and had built a reputation as someone who was fierce in protecting the heir but reasonable in negotiation. She'd also grown closer to Dominic in ways that transcended their initial alliance. Not romantically, both of them were too pragmatic for the complications that would bring, but with deep mutual respect and trust that came from facing threats together and emerging stronger. They sat together now in his office, reviewing Adrian's progress reports and planning the next phase of his education. It was comfortable, familiar, the kind of partnership that didn't require constant explanation because both parties understood the stakes. He's doing well, Dominic observed, scanning the reports. Top of his class in mathematics, showing leadership qualities in group projects, well-liked by teachers and peers. You've done remarkable work with him, Elena. We've done remarkable work, she corrected. This isn't just me. It's Isabella's guidance, your strategic thinking, the entire family's support structure. But it starts with you. You're the foundation everything else builds on. He set down the reports. I have a question, and I want you to answer honestly. All right. Are you happy? Not satisfied, not content, not successfully functioning, actually happy with this life? Elena thought about the question carefully, refusing to give easy answers to complex truths. I'm happy in ways I never expected to be. Not the happiness I imagined when I married Marco, that safe, sheltered, ordinary life. But something deeper. I have purpose, authority, genuine partnership with people who respect my capabilities. Adrian is thriving in ways he never could have if we'd kept running. And I've become stronger than I knew I could be. But, Dominic prompted, hearing what she hadn't said, but sometimes I miss the simplicity of thinking the world was divided into good and evil, right and wrong. I miss being able to make choices without calculating political implications. I miss the version of myself who could be horrified by violence instead of accepting it as necessary. That version of yourself couldn't have kept Adrian safe. I know. That's what makes it complicated. Elena stood, moving to the window where she'd stood so many times before, watching snow fall over grounds that had become familiar. I've made peace with what I've become. But I won't pretend the transformation didn't cost something. Wisdom always costs, Dominic said quietly. The question is whether the price was worth paying. Before Elena could answer, Adrian burst into the office with the kind of energy only 7-year-olds possessed, followed by Isabella at a more measured pace. Mama, Uncle Dominic, Grandmother says there's going to be a Christmas party and I get to help plan it. Can we have ice sculptures and hot chocolate? And Elena laughed, the sound genuine and warm. Slow down, baby. Yes, we can discuss party planning, but maybe let Uncle Dominic finish his work first. It's fine, Dominic said, his expression softening in the way it only did around Adrian. Planning parties is important business. Tell me your ideas and we'll see what we can arrange. As Adrian launched into enthusiastic descriptions of his vision for the perfect Christmas celebration, Elena caught Isabella's eye. The older woman's expression held something Elena had rarely seen, genuine contentment, perhaps even joy. They'd all found something in this arrangement. Adrian had stability and family. Isabella had her grandson close and thriving. Dominic had an heir being raised with proper understanding of the family's complex world. And Elena had transformed from a fugitive into a force within the family's structure. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was the life she'd chosen, fought for, and learned to not just accept, but embrace. That evening, after Adrian was asleep and the house had settled into quiet, Elena stood once more at her window, watching snow fall over the estate. But this time, Dominic joined her, bringing wine and the comfortable silence of people who understood each other without needing constant words. "You never answered my question," he said eventually. "Was the price worth paying?" Elena thought of Adrian sleeping safely in his castle bed. She thought of Isabella reading him stories in accented English, building connections that would shape him into someone capable of navigating this complex world. She thought of Dominic's steady presence, Isabella's fierce protection, the entire family's resources deployed to ensure Adrian's future. She thought of the woman she'd been, running through anonymous towns, sleeping lightly, always afraid. And she compared her to the woman she'd become, powerful, connected, capable of protecting her son through strength rather than just flight. "Yes," she said finally, certainty settling into her voice. "The price was worth paying because I didn't just gain safety and stability. I gained the ability to shape Adrian's future instead of just reacting to threats. I became someone who makes choices instead of having choices made for her." "No regrets?" "I didn't say that. I said it was worth it. Regrets and worth aren't mutually exclusive." Elena turned to face him fully. "I regret the innocence I lost, the simpler worldview I can never reclaim. But I don't regret the strength I gained, the power to protect what matters most, or the life I've built here." Dominic raised his glass in a quiet toast. "To complicated truths and necessary transformations." Elena clinked her glass against his. "And to finding home in unexpected places." They drank in comfortable silence, two people who'd arrived at alliance through crisis and built something like friendship through shared purpose. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the Romano estate in pristine white that looked beautiful and felt permanent. Elena Russo had stopped running, not because she'd been captured, but because she'd finally found something worth staying for. She'd transformed from Marco's sheltered widow into a woman who wielded power with precision, navigated complex politics with skill, and protected her son with the full force of the family's resources. The darkness she'd once fled from had become the foundation of her strength. The family she'd feared had become her allies, and the future she'd been running toward, safety, stability, the ability to stop looking over her shoulder, had been found not in escape, but in acceptance. Christmas morning arrived with sunlight glinting off snow, and Adrian's delighted laughter echoing through the halls as he discovered presents under a tree that towered in the estate's main room. Isabella watched with the soft expression she reserved only for her grandson. Dominic handed out gifts with measured generosity, and Elena stood among them, no longer on the outside looking in, but fully integrated into the fabric of this complicated, powerful, and fiercely protective family. She'd come to this house a year ago as a fugitive being dragged back against her will. She'd stayed through fear, necessity, and the desire to keep Adrian close. But somewhere along the way, necessity had transformed into choice. Fear had evolved into confidence. And the cage she'd dreaded had become a home she'd consciously built. As Adrian ran to her with a new book Isabella had given him, his eyes bright with happiness and security, Elena felt the last piece of resistance dissolve. She'd made the right choice. Not an easy one, not a simple one, but the right one for both of them. The run that had consumed 18 months of her life had finally, truly ended. Not because she'd been caught, but because she'd discovered that sometimes the thing you're running from becomes exactly what you need to survive. And in the Romano family's world of shadows and power, survival wasn't just living. It was learning to thrive in darkness, to wield strength with precision, and to protect what you loved with every resource available, no matter what that required. Elena Russo had learned those lessons well, and in learning them, she'd become something more than Marco's widow or Adrian's mother. She'd become family in the truest sense the Romanos understood, someone who belonged not through blood alone, but through demonstrated loyalty, proven capability, and the willingness to do whatever necessary to protect their own. The snow fell softly outside, covering everything in white. Inside, warmth and laughter filled rooms that had once felt like a prison, but now felt like home. And Elena stood in the center of it all, No longer running, no longer afraid, finally at peace with the woman she'd become and the future she was building. The chase was over. Home had been found, and the shadows that had once terrified her had become the very thing that kept her son and herself safe. In the end, that was worth every compromise, every transformation, every piece of innocence sacrificed along the way. It was worth everything.